Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 7. A few days passed since that encounter with the two IWA squads, and we had been patrolling more carefully than before around the border of Kusa and IWA due to our casualties. Due to that, we had made sure to keep our encounters with the enemy to a minimum and also allowed Kusa to take over patrolling a wider area of their border than before. Currently, all of us were inside the first-floor living room of the complex that Kusagakure had lent us, and were coming together to listen to the report of the information Wolf had extracted from our captives. Apparently, it was very unusual for IWA to send members of their explosion corps out, in the sense that it usually meant that IWA was planning something by bringing them out in the front lines. Everyone is here, it seems. Bor stated, his arms crossed, his muscles bulging from his clothes, and his figure towering. I would never say this out loud, but he actually looked pretty cool with that pose. It really worked for him. Bor nodded after doing a quick sweep of the room before gesturing to Wolf, who took the stand. She looked at all of us before explaining, the enemy sensor's mental defenses were tougher than anticipated. However, it appeared as if she regarded, with special fondness, our other captive. In the end, I was able to get the information I wanted. As she paused to allow everyone to digest the information, however, my mind was elsewhere. Who knew she was a Yamanaka? Wolf then pulled out a map and spread it on the large living room table, causing the rest of us to lean forward in order to get a glimpse at what she was presenting. Right here, she said, pointing to an area on the map, is where a lake spans in between the mountainous regions of the border between Kusa and IWA. It is a wide body of water, and while not necessarily an issue for shinobi, it might be a problem for transporting supplies. I looked at the area of the map and couldn't help but comment with furrowed brows. The lake is located on the eastern part of Kusa's border, the area where we are guarding. One of the reasons Kusa was comfortable allowing us, a small group of Leaf shinobi, to guard this area of their country was not only because we were an elite group of shinobi, but mainly because in the north there were a group of mountains that acted as a natural border between IWA and Kusa. Of course, it couldn't keep IWA out, but it was a pain to traverse through, and large groups of shinobi would find it hard to travel across those mountains together. The most important thing, however, was that this small mountain range actually expanded northward through IWA, and was located in the 200 kilometers eastern area that we Konoha shinobi were tasked to guard. Wolf nodded her head at my comment and continued, "This is actually why we met with members of the Explosion Corps." The woman pointed to an area in the middle of the mountain ranges that was close to the lake. Around here is a dormant volcano that hasn't been active in over a century. Currently, there seems to be no sign of it activating in the next half-century or so, but that might change quite soon. Everyone perked up at that. Shark, the man who had his arm blown off and was used as a test sub-patient by me, spoke up in consternation. "What exactly do you mean, Captain? If the volcano isn't expected to be active for another 50 years, then why would it suddenly activate? You might have to thank IWA for that," Wolf stated, causing everyone to listen even more intently to what she was about to say. From what I gathered, that Tsuchikage had been sending small groups of shinobi, containing members of their explosion corps, to the site of the inactive volcano. She breathed a heavy sigh before continuing, "Apparently, they plan to use a unique technique that would allow them to implant their chakra's explosive nature into inanimate substances, in order to transform the cavern floor of the volcano into a giant bomb." I could see the forms of everyone around me tensing at that information as Bor asked forbiddingly, "You can't mean?" Wolf nodded her head. "Right. The Tsuchikage had the genius idea to startle the volcano awake, and cause it to erupt prematurely by setting off a mass explosion with the chakra of Explosion Corps members. This," Shark stated in shock, gripping the area of his arm that was missing, and he wasn't the only one who was startled by the revelation, as even Turtle tensed up. "I'm not sure if I can outrun the pyroclastic flow, not in that terrain." Viper, the other man who I had helped heal aside from Shark, asked, what exactly do they plan to gain from this? And how long do we have? The man was very lean, however. I could tell from his body that he had amazing flexibility and agility. It wouldn't surprise me if his reaction speeds were high as well. We have about a week or so, as it takes a while for enough chakra to be transmitted into the volcano floor for their plan to be feasible. As for what they hope to gain from this, she put on a thoughtful look. Her memories did not explicitly state what the end goal was, but I can harbor a guess. She looked at the map again before explaining, if the volcano erupts, it is close enough to the lake that the magma will flow into it and instantly cool and harden, creating a solid enough foundation with which IWA could use to move their troops. This will also allow for a relatively stable passageway that they can use to transport supplies to the front lines, effectively creating another canopy bridge. But that is a double-edged sword. Dove spoke up. She pointed to the area on the other side of the volcano on the map. If it erupts, magma will flow both ways, and it will take longer to cool on Iwa's side, where there is no nearby body of water, than it would on Kusa's side. Long enough that Kusa would be able to react to the sudden sound and start positioning more of its defenses to that area. But it will thin out their forces. Bor suddenly spoke up. Kusa is a small country and doesn't have nearly as many shinobi as IWA does. Spreading their forces will leave them more vulnerable to infiltration and attack on their now more open ends. Not only that, it will still take some time before our reinforcements arrive, and if this insane plan succeeds, then IWA might be able to create a strong enough foothold here that it might not matter when our reinforcements finally do. Everyone took a pause at that information. The current issue was that the war had really just started, and so Konoha hadn't finished preparing all of its forces. They had to make sure that they had enough forces to protect their borders near Kumo, the land of lightning, and Kiri, the land of water. Suna, in the land of wind, were our allies, so we didn't have to worry about them. Afterward, Konoha had to decide how many shinobi they were willing to delegate to Kusa to defend against Iwa's invasion, and how many they needed to stay at the home country. In essence, it would take a while. Bor sighed before continuing, regardless, we have to relay this information to Kusa. What we need to do is stop this plan before it goes to its last stages. I believe that if we can accomplish this, IWA might be demoralized enough that they'll halt their advance, hopefully, long enough for our support arrives. However, I could see that not everyone here was too optimistic about the odds. If IWA has been planning this for some time now, then there was a good chance that they had plenty of contingency plans in place just in case things went south. We shouldn't stress ourselves over it now. Dove started, gathering everyone's attention. We have enough time to reconvene with the Kusanine and plan out a course of action. In the meantime, I would suggest we all just continue to stay vigilant and watch the borders more carefully. That's a sound enough plan given for our situation. Wolf stated. At the very least, we should be glad that we received this information. It would have been a lot worse if we had been caught unprepared, and if it wasn't for the captive that Squirrel apprehended in his fight, the sensor might not have broken in time. Haha, good shit, kid. Shark said as he slapped my back in approval. Ow. Shark snickered, while the other squad members looked at me in approval, and even though I couldn't tell with her mask on, I felt that Dove was proud of me. All right, Dove, Wolf and I will talk to the Kusa leaders about this information. In the meantime, you all sit back and recover your energy, you might need it. And with that, Bor vanished. The rest of the shinobi present went in to do their own thing before Dove began patting my head. You did good, Squirrel, for your first night out, and I couldn't be happier about how you did. Keep it up. She too then vanished, leaving only Wolf as the last team leader here. I walked up to her, as she was packing the mat she used, causing her to look at me. What's up, kid? I looked at her for a while and asked her a question that had been on my mind. What happened to the 2 captives we brought? I disposed of them. The woman said simply. I blinked. Remember, Yora, that we are soldiers at war. She said, looking straight at me. We never show our enemies mercy. And with that, The woman disappeared in a swirl of leaves, leaving me with Shark, who sighed in relief. God, she's scary and hot at the same time. Why does that weirdly arouse me? I left Shark to discover parts of himself that he never knew existed and contemplated her words before shaking my head. A soldier, huh? What the hell is that old fool Inoki thinking? A man yelled, his voice echoing throughout the meeting room. A couple more days had passed since the talk I had with my prisoner. Boar, Wolf, and Dove had come together to discuss the next plan of action with the native Kusa shinobi, and they agreed to have an emergency meeting with us on the topic. As a result, and because there weren't many of us Konoha shinobi here, all of us were in the meeting room where the leaders were planning their strategy. The man yelling was one of the heads of Kusa's assault division, and needless to say, he was not happy. I'll refer to him as Important Guy 1 since I really didn't care about his name. Important Guy 1 continued, "If this is true, then it'll affect him just as much as it will affect us. This is insanity." Not quite. Important Guy 2 from Kusa spoke. I think he was one of the generals and was considered a good strategist by many, at least that's what Dove told me. It's true that on the surface we might face the same amount of damage, however, IWA is larger and has that much more resources that they can pull from. As opposed to them, we would have a much more difficult time with the aftermath simply due to our limited size. Then what do you suppose we do? Some other random guy spoke up. I don't think he was that important though. Important Guy 2 looked at Boar and asked, "How long exactly do we have?" 5 days. Wolf was the one to reply. And that is if everything goes well on their end, which we can't be sure of. Important Guy 2 nodded. We'll treat this as the worst-case scenario and act as if we have even less time than that. Truthfully, the only option we have is to take a few elite shinobi and halt the threat, while simultaneously keeping the majority of our forces on our borders in order to prevent IWA from taking advantage of any gap we may leave. The man sighed before asking, "Any information about how many forces they have stationed there?" Wolf tuned barely a moment to reply, "My captive's memories did not state any specific number, but based on the amount of time they have been there, the size of the volcano, and the amount of expected force that would be needed, I would wager that the Tsuchikage had sent a decent number. Probably around 15 squads with 3 to 4 members each and around 1 to 2 of each member being from the Explosion Corps. If we expect the worst, then that's around 60 enemy shinobi with 30 of them being in the Explosion Corps." The man rubbed his chin in thought, before nodding to himself after a while. The most efficient yet riskiest plan would be to send in a small number of elites who are skilled in infiltration and demolition. We can have them kill off as many of the enemy shinobi as they can, drawing the majority of the enemy's attention towards them. If we can draw them away from the volcano enough, another group can swoop in from behind, through the mountain ranges, and block off their path of retreat. Well, that's the gist of it, at least, simple and crude, but if Inoki truly wants to go through with this plan, then it will be effective. I could hear murmurs of agreement going around before one person spoke up. Then who will go? And how many? My squad will have to go. Dove suddenly spoke up, drawing attention towards her. We have 2 sensors, and a uniquely fast shinobi on my team. I can easily pinpoint the enemy's position, and with my sensing capabilities, I should be able to detect them before any of their sensors detect me. Important Guy 1 nodded. That will be very useful to have, so I'll have 4 3-man assault squads assist you in that endeavor. I'll pick the ones who are very skilled in infiltration, and we can plan out our course of action more in depth when I get them. Dove nodded. That sounds excellent. She then looked to Important Guy 2 and asked, "Do you have anything to add, General?" The man out on a thoughtful expression for a moment before shaking his head. Most of what I have to say will be said when the other groups arrive. I do believe, however, that this should be the maximum amount of individuals that we should use as a diversion. The rest of our forces will be flanking the enemy, but other than that, I've got nothing else for now. Dove nodded, and the room soon delved into debates and plans about the incoming mission. I listened to the plans and easily committed them to memory with eidetic memory. After a while, Important Guy 2 spoke up as Important Guy 1 came back into the setting. Now that all the necessary parties are here, let's move on with our next course of action. Remember the plan? Dove asked as we silently moved across the rocky terrain. It was currently nighttime, and we were traveling towards the site of the active volcano, me, Dove, and Turtle. I nodded my head at Dove's question. You'll create and dispel a clone as a signal to the other clones that you left in the care of the Kusa squads. We'll attack and try to draw as much of the aggression as possible. My job is to create as many clones as I can, and have them create traps and stall as we escape. Dove nodded. Then let's begin. Turtle. On it. He yelled as he created 2 clones and ran forward with them at incredible speeds. If it wasn't for the fact that the terrain wasn't flat, and that we were in a pretty dense and rocky forest, I knew that Turtle would have easily broken the sound barrier. Dove made a hand seal and caused a clone to appear before it dispelled. Let's go. We dashed forward, foregoing stealth as we made our way towards the currently dormant volcanic area. Turtle's job had been to use his clones to scout and trigger booby traps that may be around the camp, while he himself created as much disorder as fast as he could with his swift release. A simple diversion that we could only use because Turtle was confident in his speed and so were we. In but a few seconds, we came across the area where the enemy shinobi were expected to be. Fuck enemy attack. Get in your formations. Protect the explosion core and secure your positions. Earth walls. Create earth walls, damn it. Orders and directions were screamed about as the enemy shinobi reacted to our attack at the base of the volcanic area. Dove gave me a look before she splintered off and did what she could to attract the enemy attention while I looked ahead impassively. We had already planned the escape routes we would use, so there we didn't worry about us being separated when it came time to escape. In front of me, I noted a squad of 3 staying in a circular formation with their backs against each other, and their gaze focused in 3 different directions as they looked about nervously. With my enhanced auditory senses, I could hear what they were saying as I approached them. I flipped through a few hand seals and got a weapon from my inventory while stalking them silently. Damn it. Why did the enemy target this location? How did they even know about it? 2 demolition squads a few days ago. His partner replied, gripping his kunai tightly. They left to help assist one of our scouts in repelling the enemy, but they never returned. They must have been captured and tortured for information. Those traitors. The first one spat in rage. Keep your eyes peeled. The third and last member of the group said. 3 of them were fast enough to outrun and disable our traps, and we have no idea how many others duck. But they were too slow. I had already thrown out a Fuma shuriken as I was in the sky and watched as it flew towards them. As they made to move out of the way, I twitched 2 fingers on both of my hands and separated the giant throwing star with the wire I had attached to it. The long blades of the projectile separated into 4 at my movements, with the strings attached to the blades and allowing me to maneuver them. I channeled my lightning strike into both my hands, and with another jerk of my fingers, 2 lightning-enhanced metal blades impaled one of the enemies through the chest, instantly killing him. The remaining 2 projectiles impaled my last 2 targets in the legs, the electricity traveling through their body causing them to spasm. Shit. Enemy this way. We need reinforcements. One of the injured shinobi screamed, drawing attention to my area. However, before they could come to his aid, they were distracted by an explosion that rocketed the other end of their camp, and I gazed at the green fireworks quietly. Seems like Kusa finished in time. That's my cue to leave. And with that, I threw 5 kunai with both my hands, each projectile containing special explosion tags that spewed green flames. The explosions weren't stronger by any means, but they were our signal to retreat after we had gotten enough of their attention. My attack caused more damage to the surroundings, and caused enough of a distraction that I was able to create distance between me and my incoming enemies. One of them is getting away. Follow him. Shit. But we have to guard this site. We can't just abandon it. But if we don't, they may come back when we are least prepared. After them. I could hear the arguments and screams of frustration behind me as I made my escape, which meant that I had successfully drawn their aggression. With a pulse of my chakra sonar, I sensed the chakras of both dove and turtle around a 750-meter radius from me, which set my mind at ease. They escaped successfully as well. Time for Phase 2. With a flip of a hand seal, 10 clones came into existence beside me. They all nodded at me and went on their way to stall and trap the enemy shinobi however they could. I had created a good enough distance from them, mainly due to the fact that they could hardly see me in the low visibility, and they had been quite distracted from the fireworks happening all around. To be honest, Phase 2 was not as complicated as it sounded. It pretty much entailed that all the assault teams had to keep themselves alive long enough for the reinforcements to arrive at the flank. I could spam clones with my large chakra reserves, Turtle could outrun most elite ninja, and Dove was a magnificent sensor who could hide whenever she sensed an enemy coming all the way from 20 kilometers. I had no idea how the other teams planned on keeping themselves alive for the time being, but it really wasn't my issue. My mind was brought back as memories of a clone came back to me. Before I could even look through them, my attention was brought back to my rear as an enormous explosion rocketed out far behind me. Another set of memories appeared in my mind as chakra returned to me from my clones. They had set off large amounts of explosive tags before they died, most likely taking out the enemies that had been following me. I encouraged myself to move faster as the sounds of explosions increased and more of my clones died. At the speed I was traveling, my enemies and I were already well away from their camp at the base of the volcano. The other strike team would have a little bit more time now to traverse the mountains and attack from behind. I was broken out of my thoughts, however, when I noticed that after most of the chakra signatures following me had died from the traps my clones had managed to set up in time, a lot of them were starting to retreat. As I was about to contemplate this further, my brows knitted tightly as my last clone died. This might be a bit problematic. An extremely powerful chakra signature was making its way towards me quickly, having pulverized my clone, but Dove and Turtle were also currently preoccupied with escaping, so they would be unable to help. If they tried, they would also bring along the groups chasing them as well, which would make this situation that much more dangerous. We had to escape while leaving a trail so that our enemies could follow us and leave their base, which would allow our other group to flank them. If we didn't leave clues for them to follow us and they simply gave up chasing, our flanking group would have to face a now more guarded IWA base/camp. The chakra signature seemed to be around Jonin and was closing in on me quickly. I hastily summoned a clone who knew exactly what I needed him to do, so it made its way further ahead of me, while I started to slow down. Based on my opponent's speed, she would be able to catch up with me eventually, based on the fact that she was shrugging off the multiple explosive traps my clones had set up. I eventually stopped running since this seemed to be the only enemy left that was chasing me. The rest had retreated, probably figuring that this was a large diversion. However, at this point, it didn't matter. When the green explosions had gone off at the base of the IWA camp, it was also meant to alert our other forces to begin their movements. Additionally, we had already forced them a good distance away from their base, so they most likely wouldn't make it in time. I turned around and waited for my enemy to approach, but not before creating 4 shadow clones and having them henge into kunai. "It seems you've given up escaping, kid," the man said as he arrived in front of me, cracking the earth as he roughly landed from the trees to the ground. He had short black hair, onyx eyes, with a densely packed build. He stared into my eyes while I stared into his until he snickered. "ANBU, huh? Kusa doesn't have the skill nor resources needed to train up and maintain such a division, and Konoha is the only country who has something to gain from helping this small country." He cracked his neck while staring at me, "But to think that a kid like you would have the skill necessary to be part of that group. You must be talented," he said, staring at me seriously. Seeing as it was pointless, and it would inhibit my water techniques, I took off my ANBU mask and placed it in my inventory, though I made sure to use a henge to disguise my real face. "I'd like to consider myself adequate," was my reply as I carefully observed him. Name, Rock Shinobi. Race, human. Level, LVL 52. HP, 37500/37500. CP 12664/19000. STR 300. VIT 375. DEX 225. INT 200. WIS 200. NG 380. The man looked at me intently before smirking and cracking his knuckles. "We'll see, kid." I looked at the man intently as I quickly came up with numerous scenarios in my mind. This man was faster, stronger, and had more health than I did. The only thing I could match him in was intelligence, and I outclassed him in ENGY and CP. I briefly contemplated using my stat points, but if a time came when someone even stronger than me came along and I had no stat points to boost myself, then what would I do? I didn't want to use them as a crutch. Beside, I wanted to test my tactical skills and analysis. I tightly gripped my kunai and watched as he slowly made his way towards me before he suddenly blurred. My eyes widened and I hastily crossed my arms to guard against the incoming attack. However, I was a little too slow. His attack smashed against my arms and catapulted me back into the forest. My body crashed into multiple trees, causing me to grit my teeth as I hastily tried to rebalance my body. I skidded to a stop, my feet dragging lines across the rocky ground. -1895. Jordan. HP 16300/18195. I shook my arms to get rid of the numbing sensation while watching the man appear from the trees my body had destroyed. Immediately, I threw my projectiles towards him while simultaneously trying to place him in a genjutsu. The man let them bounce off his body. However, I twitched my fingers. The black metal wire that connected my fingers to the kunai responded to my movements and caused the projectiles to change course midair as they wrapped around my enemy. "Interesting," the man stated blandly before he flexed against his bindings. I grit my teeth and focused my strength in restraining him while simultaneously flipping through hand seals. Lightning strike. I intoned in my mind as lightning flowed from my hands, through the metal wire, and into the body of the IWA shinobi. He screamed in agony and flailed. However, my victory was short-lived as the man turned into mud. When did he? I thought, eyes widening. Before I could contemplate any further, my detect danger warned me of an incoming attack from below. I flipped through a few hand seals, but before I could even move to jump, a pair of hands wrapped around my ankles and pulled me into the earth as if it were made of fine sand. "This is Earth style, hiding like a mole technique," my opponent, Ray, stated as he popped up from the earth before looking down at me, his arm poised to strike. I looked up to him apathetically, and suddenly spit 5 balls of chakra-enhanced water bullets at my adversary as he was in close range. The man's brows knitted as he crosses his arms and jumped back away from me towards the direction his mud clone had been. "Which is where I need him." The moment that thought went through my head, the man's foot landed on the ground, and in that instant 3 of my hinged kunai transformed back into me and wrapped around the man's body, both his legs and his torso. It was important to note that the ninja wire in both my hands was still attached to my kunai, aka my hinged clones, so before the man could react, I channeled my lightning strike through the metal wire and into the body of the IWA shinobi. "Fuck," he swore, as the lightning coursed through his veins and he tensed his muscles to mitigate the pain. -3720. -3720. HP 30060/37500. The man suddenly stopped tensing and chuckled lightly. "I admit you got me there, however." With a grunt he pulled himself up and slammed his back against the ground. My clone screamed and then dispelled from the impact, causing smoke to rise up and obscure my vision momentarily. "Shit," I thought as shards of rock flew at me from the momentary smoke, causing me to retreat back. I quickly brought out my kunai and rapidly deflected the earthen projectiles as I backpedaled deeper into the forest. With cold sweat dripping down my face, I pulsated my chakra with chakra sonar. Immediately, I jumped up into the air just as a pair of arms jutted out from the ground. The same trick. I thought, however, the only reply I received was a spike of earth jutting from the ground and hurtling towards me swiftly. It would have impaled me through the stomach, had I not used substitution to replace myself with a log that was promptly shredded by the attack. In the same instant, I threw a kunai with an explosive tag attached into the hole where the arms had come out from. With my hands clasped together and my fingers interlocking, I mentally thought explode. A shower of dust and debris appeared as the ground below blew up into chunks, so I hastily covered my eyes, while pulsing my chakra, in order to protect my vision. When the dust literally settled, I already knew that my attack had failed as both my detect danger and chakra sonar skills warned me of an enemy behind. I promptly jumped off the tree I was on just as a pair of arms came out of the foliage to ensnare me. Good reaction speeds, amazing tactical and situational awareness, and creative use of skills, you're one frightening kid. The voice of my opponent sounded as he made his body fully visible. This time I made sure I was dealing with the real deal by continuously pulsing my chakra, which ensured me that I was. I looked back at him impassively, thank you. However, I was inwardly watching his every action and committing them to memory. As I was about to make my next move, the clone I had sent ahead of me earlier popped and transmitted its memories to me that it had completed its job. All of this took merely a moment to occur, and so it was almost immediately after I had thanked him that I retreated backward. The man followed suit and was hot on my tail, so I clapped my hands together. Explode. Instantly, the trees behind me exploded into chunks of splinters, causing the man to scream out in anger at the attack. I knew that it wouldn't hold him for long, but it would allow me to pull the distance between us as I got closer to the clearing my clone had set up. It was also that same clone that lined these trees ahead of me with explosive tags. I jumped from tree to tree, occasionally blowing one up along the way to slow down my enemy, before I arrived at the area my clone had set up at. No sooner did the IWA arrive, his clothes tattered and a frown on his face. I narrowed my eyes. I noticed that he was slightly out of breath, his diaphragm rising and lowering more than it had a moment ago before I had tried to blow him up. I quickly observed him and found out why. Name, Rock Shinobi. Race, human. Level, LVL 52. HP, 30098/37500. CP, 6186/19000. His CP. It was a lot lower than it should have been from the techniques he had been using. They couldn't have been any more than C-rank ninjutsu, so there was no reason he should have lost around half of his chakra. Furthermore, when I had first observed him, his CP was already only 2/3 full. This meant that he must have done something that cost him a lot of his energy, probably the same thing that kept him from being harmed by all my traps and explosions. Could it be Rock's skin consumes chakra equivalent to the damage taken? I thought before settling in a stance and staring him down. My opponent regarded me cautiously and narrowed his eyes before suddenly dashing towards me rapidly, however this time I was more prepared. When fighting opponents in hand-to-hand combat, perfect movement doubled my movement speed and increased my attack/evasion speed by 50%, and that wasn't even mentioning the additional bonus I got in movement speed and reflexes from Cat's Grace, which increased them by 50%. In other words, I was just slightly faster than him in a straight-up fight. I ducked under a kick aimed for my head and back flipped away from his extended leg right before it stomped the ground where I had stood. I near instantaneously went through hand seals and bulged my cheeks before spitting out highly chakra-dense water bullets. The man sked and jumped away from my projectiles instead of thanking them like he usually did. I hastily ran forward in order attack before he regained his footing, however before I could attack him, he flipped through hand seals and stomped his foot on the ground, causing a large wall of solid earth to obstruct my path. I gripped my fists and swung them at the wall, causing spiderweb cracks to spread out on the structure before it collapsed into heaps of rock. I immediately knew he wasn't behind the wall from my chakra sonar, so I swiftly turned around. However, the enemy Jonin had already popped up behind me from the earth and was reaching towards me with his outstretched arm. My danger sense suddenly wailed at me to not allow myself to get touched by his hands, and I moved to retreat. However, my eyes widened when the back of his arm released an explosion, accelerating his attack tremendously and catching me off guard. His punch impacted my ribs, cracking a few in the process. However, that was not all. Explosion release, exploding palm. His fist exploded on impact and launched me back, my body breaking through multiple trees in the process. My body was racked with severe pain as I felt almost all my ribs break, and I had a feeling there was a hole in my stomach right now. Minus 13,255. Jordan. HP 3685/18195. I coughed out blood and pieces of my entrails as I thought about my current predicament. After all, who knew he was a member of the Explosion Corps? The duration between the first time he had damaged me and now had been no more than 2 minutes, during which I had recovered 640 HP, but now I just lost over 3/4 of my remaining life. I could recover, but all I needed was time, which I don't really have much of. But I watched as the man slowly made his way towards me as he looked at my down form grimly. During the entire time we had been combating, I had been carefully manipulating my chakra into his system in order for him to see a slightly different picture than what he was seeing at this moment. I looked up to him apathetically and coughed a few more times. The man took a look at my face before shaking his head with a snicker, still acting so tough. "Well, it's your funeral," he yelled as he brought down an explosion release covered fist down on my body. However, before his attack could connect, I spat at him. I could see the man suddenly tense at my saliva, before forcing himself to change his course of action and jump back. My single ball of spit flew past him. However, 3 red lines appeared on his cheek, and blood immediately started to gush from the wounds. The man widened his eyes and touched his face to feel the dripping blood before his body suddenly shook unsteadily. He immediately dropped to a knee as cold sweat dripped from his face. What?" he asked in surprise before his eyes widened, and he shakily formed a hand seal before stating with bated breaths, "Genjutsu, release." I wasn't surprised that he had figured it out so quickly, but I doubted he shared the same sentiment as the visual illusion I had put him in disappeared. Instead of seeing me on the brink of death, he now saw my glowing green hand over the gaping hole in my stomach that was rapidly closing, the mystical palm technique increasing my already rapid regeneration rate. "Why you?" He glared at me in unwillingness and disbelief before gritting his teeth, veins popping from his head. "How?" "Genjutsu and planning," I stated simply before looking past him. He followed my gaze and noted the Senbon which had caused the gashes on his face. I had used a Genjutsu on him to make him see spit when in reality, I had attacked him with Senbon coated with the highly potent giant Komodo dragon venom. He would probably be experiencing a rapid decrease in blood pressure, accelerated blood loss, and he might possibly be sent into shock. Oh, and he would feel a lot of pain as well. The Senbon had been courtesy of my teacher, so I had placed them in my inventory for safekeeping, but not before coating them with the extracted venom of the giant Komodo dragon I had killed from before, using Koto's help to extract it. In this situation, I decided to access my inventory through the inside of my mouth, and with my poison resistance, they didn't cause me as much damage or pain as they did him. They were, however, uncomfortable. My mouth was a bit numb. The man looked at me with barely suppressed rage as he shakily stood up before walking towards me. "I'm going to kill you." "Doubtful," was my reply as I continued to heal my stomach, a slight grimace on my face. I took out a kunai, lazily tossed it at his direction, causing it to soar past his head. He looked at me with a sneer. "You missed." "No, I didn't." The man's body suddenly tensed before he tried to shift his positioning, but he simply couldn't, the poison affecting his ability to move. My kunai impacted a tree behind the man, cutting a string of black wire, and at that moment, large amounts of ninja wire wrapped around him, each inch of it densely packed with explosive tags. The wires extended into the tree lines around us, and the tags were painted a dark green color that made them blend in with the tree leaves. The dark night sky further hid them from any discernible view, unless someone had been right in front of them. The man looked on in horror as he struggled fervently against his bindings. I went through one-handed hand seals as I wrapped my free hand around a wire and stared at him blandly. Before we had faced off, I had a clone set up and booby-trapped this particular area. All I had to do was lead the Iwagakure shinobi here and get him weak enough that he would be unable to react against the trap. Leading him here was easy, but making him weaker took a lot of effort since I had to get him to lower your guard. Still, I was able to do it. The man looked at me as if I was inhuman before gnashing his teeth. How? My stoic face remained unchanging as I looked up into the night sky. Based on the position of the moon and the angle of its light, I didn't really have the time to play around here. As much as I would enjoy sitting down and monologuing my entire plan to you in detail, I have a time schedule to uphold. The man looked at me, his expression livid. Damn you! You better pray I don't come out of this alive. The man stated in indignation. I gave him a blank look. Don't worry, you won't. And with that I proceeded to ignore his following ramblings and activated my lightning strike technique, causing lightning to flow through the wire and into the IWA shinobi. Simultaneously I detonated the explosive tags. Immediately, I substituted myself a far distance away and watched with a raised brow as a huge explosion sounded out, spreading a light shockwave that even I, who was 400 meters away, felt. Geez, how many explosive tags did my clone use? Well, I did get them from Minato and Kushina. An interesting thing I had found out was that my clones had access to my inventory, so whatever I stored there was readily available to them. I had been given a lot of explosive tags from Kushina and Minato, which were much more potent than normal. I pulsed out my chakra in order to locate my teacher and Turtle. However, they were probably outside my detection range as I couldn't sense them. It made sense considering I had been more focused on fighting than escaping, so I made my way back to our meet-up point. I hopped across the foliage and eventually came across a cave that my team members had set up as a safe point. I pulsed my chakra as I approached and noted that there were 2 chakra signatures inside, both of them familiar. With a light sigh of relief, I made my way inside, catching the attention of the 2 individuals already there. Yo, Yoru! Turtle said with a tired wave, his mask to the floor against him. I noticed that he was very out of breath, and looking at his stats, I realized that his stamina and chakra levels were very low. I nodded in greeting and turned to the other occupant in the room, but my body froze. You? I'm alright, Yoru. Koto said with a grimace as she nursed her wrapped-up leg, the blood leaking from the bandages. Though I suppose having your help would be nice. I didn't need to be told twice, so I hastily came to her aid. I quickly unraveled her bandages and ignored the burnt skin as my hands glowed green over her. What happened to both of you? I asked while keeping my chakra control in check for my mystic palm technique. Turtle looked at me and stated pantingly, explosion release, legs, ran faster. The man's eyes rolled to the back of his head, and I had to wonder if he was going to be okay. My teacher snickered and I turned back to her, seeing her roll her eyes. I've pretty much deciphered what he's been trying to say. I believe he faced an opponent with explosion release who used it to accelerate and propel themselves much faster than any normal shinobi could usually move. Probably through releasing explosions from their legs in miniature, but powerful bursts to up their speed. She probably exhausted Turtle with a long-winded game of cat and mouse, and he burned up his chakra and stamina with continued use of his swift release. You got all that from 5 words? I was wondering if I should be impressed. She merely smirked in reply before looking at me. And what about you? Aside from the hole in your shirt, you don't look so bad. Good on you, kid. I looked down on my shirt and realized that Ray's explosion release punch must have blown a hole in my shirt when it blew open my stomach, which made sense. No, my opponent also had explosion release and blew my stomach open. Koto suddenly froze up and looked at me seriously. Are we going to have a talk about this? I blew him up with over 1,000 explosion tags. I suppose not then. With that, we lapsed into silence as I continued doing my best to heal her wounds. I noted that Turtle had lapsed into sleep due to his low CP and stamina levels, but he was otherwise fine. I then looked at Koto and observed her status as I continued to heal her. Name, Koto. Race, human. Level, LVL 72. HP, 38636/65000. CP, 10747/46080. STR, 675. VIT, 650. Dex, 625. Int, 665. WIS, 630. NG, 640. I nodded my head, seeing that she was otherwise alright aside from her burns. I continued to heal her, noting that she had closed her eyes, so I pulsed my chakra and made sure to keep myself alert. I wonder if the other group has already flanked them. The plan that Kusa and we had come up with was pretty simple. It involved a few teams sneak attacking the camp to draw the enemy shinobi out, another, much larger, group of teams flanking Iwa's position, as they chased the first team, in order to block off any path of retreat for them, and a final third team that would come up from the front, effectively sandwiching the IWA shinobi in between. We had the elements of surprise and knowledge on our side, so there was a greater chance that the plan would work. With that thought, I made a clone and had it go outside to watch for any signals or enemies while I continued to heal up my teacher. I thought through the battle that I had with that Kusa ninja, and it made me realize something. It wasn't that stats weren't everything, because that was false. If I faced someone like Madara, or actually any Kage-level shinobi, or even high-level jonins, I would get smacked around like a doll. The enemy I had faced was only around the level of a Tokubetsu jonin, but he had a lot more chakra than usual. No, what I found important was that how I used my skills and knowledge would decide my victory and defeat. I couldn't say that the man was as smart as me, even though we had the same intelligence stat, because intelligence denoted much more than just knowledge. He was a seasoned shinobi who must have fought and killed much more than I had. Just the fact that I was able to plan ahead of him gave me the edge I needed to win, in addition to the fact that he had slightly let his guard down at the end. I needed to learn from his mistakes and make sure that I did not make the same ones in the future. You didn't have to go through angst-ridden drama-filled failure in order to learn a lesson and grow. As human beings, we were capable of learning and internalizing information simply from observation. I was broken from my muse when I heard the loud sound of a signal flare, and no sooner did my clone pop, sending me the information that it had seen a blue signal flare light up the sky. Thank goodness it is over, I thought when I received the images. The blue signal flare was the signal that we had successfully captured and/or defeated the opposition, and had secured their base of operations. With this, I could safely traverse back to our rooms, so I made a few clones, and had them carry Koto and Turtle while making one more clone to scout ahead. There were no more disruptions along the way, so it barely took any time for my clones and me to make it back inside Kusa's village gates. I had my clones place Turtle on the couch while I took my teacher back to my room. Since shinobi were extremely cautious and suspicious, Turtle and Koto had told me that they had locked and booby-trapped their rooms, so I could only do this for them for now. After I entered my room, I placed Koto on the bed and laid down in the bed, but before I dozed off, I checked my progress for today. Post-battle progress report. Congratulations, Mystic Palm Technique has leveled up by 3. Congratulations, Illusion Mastery has leveled up by 2. Congratulations, Water Style, Water Bullet Jutsu has leveled up by 1. Congratulations, you have gained 72,700 EXP. You have leveled up by 1. I supposed that the traps my clones had set up as I was escaping had managed to defeat a few of the enemy ninjas. Regardless, I was exhausted, so after giving the progress report a once-over, I closed my eyes and went to sleep. Chapter 8. The days came and left until eventually a week and a half passed by since the successful ambush of the IWA shinobi stationed at the volcano. Due to that, IWA had been successfully demoralized enough from their losses that they scarcely made any attacks against Kusa's borders. During this time, us Konoha shinobi had been taking it slightly easier, as well, since our resident censor had been recuperating from her wounds. Other than that, I can finally go home," Shark said with a grin as he frantically waved his stump. We were all currently located in the usual first-floor living space of our large, Kusa-granted, complex. What was important, however, was the fact that there were many more Konoha shinobi here than there had been before. Reinforcements had started arriving a couple days ago in separate, but large, groups indicating that Konoha had finally figured out where and how to position its manpower. This was great for the 3 teams of ninjas that had already been here because it meant our mission was complete. The previously arrived Konoha team leaders, Dove, Wolf, and Boar, were convening with the recently arrived team leaders and exchanging information while the rest of us were packing up and lounging around till they were done. Shark wrapped his arm around my shoulder and sighed. "Your first completed mission, kid, how do you feel?" "All right, I suppose," I replied blandly. I stared at the man, more in particular the stump he had for a right arm. The man looked back at me and wiggled it around, which got my attention. "I told you to stop looking so sorry for me. A lost arm is nothing new in this business, you know. I'll survive." I returned my gaze back to his stump before shaking my head. "No, it's not that. It's just, I don't really understand." The man raised his brows and asked speculatively, "What exactly?" I thought for a moment before replying. "I can't understand how chakra can allow a man like the first Hokage to subdue the tailed beasts, yet it can't simply give someone back a lost limb. The first used trees to take down the 9 tails, but we haven't found a way to heal lost limbs?" The man actually put on a thoughtful expression before shrugging. "I guess that's just how it is. What can you do?" "Find a solution," I said simply. Shark suddenly froze before staring at me. What? I turned my gaze away from his stump and reiterated, "If there's currently no way to regrow a lost limb using medical ninjutsu, then I'll just have to find a way how." The man took a deep breath before gripping his left fist and staring at me stubbornly. "Why?" I thought about his question, and it only took me a moment to understand. "When I saw your wounds, the first thought that I had going through my mind was, what if someone I cared for was in your position? And I realized that I didn't want to even think about such a situation. The best way for me to do that would be to make such a situation obsolete, and the only way to do that would be to find a way to fix it. I'll be honest in saying that I'm not doing this for you, but at the same token, you're the reason I am deciding to do this. When I am finished researching how to regrow lost limbs through medical ninjutsu, I will help you get yours back." The man stared at my face stubbornly before turning away. "Whatever, kid, do what you want." I simply rolled my eyes and smiled under my face mask. Who knew he was such a tsundere? The rest of my time here was spent in relative silence and peace until Dove came back and informed me to pack up and get going. I gathered everything I had in my inventory and met up with Dove, and eventually I arrived at the village exit. The other teams were also there, with Boar looking around for a little bit before nodding his head. "All right, since we are all here, let's move out." The travel back to the village was relatively calm, and not much really happened. It took us a little over a day to get back, and now we were all at the village entrance. "Man, it's good to be back," Shark said tiredly as we all stepped into the village walls after passing through the guards. The rest of us murmured our agreements before Wolf stated, "While that's true, we still have to check in with Lord Danzo and Lord Hokage about our mission results. The security of Kusa's border is of the utmost importance after all." Shark groaned, and though I didn't show it, I felt the same as well. This mission had been mentally exhausting, and right now, I didn't want to have to deal with anything else. Unfortunately, duty called. With that, we hopped up on the rooftops and caught up with the others who had gone on ahead. In no time, we made it to the Hokage Tower, where we had to wait for a few moments before we were allowed to enter the Hokage's office. I just now realized that this would be the first time I had ever seen the third Hokage up close, and I had to say that it was definitely an interesting experience. Inside the room was not only the Hokage, but also Danzo, as well, and no doubt there were some ANBU hidden inside the room as well. I took all this in while looking at the old man carefully, and I couldn't help but want to observe him, so I did. Observe. Name, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Race, human. Level, 280. HP? CP? STR? VIT? Dex? Int? WIS? NG? I had to call upon the full force of gamer's mind to keep my expression in check, yet that didn't stop cold sweat from forming on my back. He's strong, was the only coherent thought I could form in my mind. As a result, I was immensely thankful when I was brought back by the booming sound of Boar's voice. Lord Hokage, the mission to guard the border between Kusagakura and Iwagakure and collect intel about Kusa's security was a success. Please instruct us further, the man said with the utmost professionalism. The Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, interlocked his fingers and gazed at each and every one of us, but I swore he looked at me a second longer. He returned his gaze back to Boar and replied, "Very well done. I had already received a scroll from Kusa complimenting all of your skills and abilities throughout these last few weeks. They were immensely thankful for your aid, and if not for the fact that you were there to aid them, they may have been out in dire straits from Iwa's nefarious schemes. Thank you for your service to this village." Boar hastily bowed, to which everyone else followed before the Hokage continued, "Now please rise. As per usual, your mission pay will be directly deposited in your accounts, and there will be reimbursements for those who suffered more permanent debilitative injuries. You are all dismissed. However, I would like to have a word with Koto and her charge." "Yes, Lord Hokage." We chorused before everyone left except Turtle, Koto and I. Turtle gave us a smile and waved at us before he left as well, leaving Koto and me as the last two individuals here. Hiruzen scanned me up and down before humming thoughtfully, "So this is the boy you talked about, Danzo?" The bandaged man nodded his head, "Yes, old friend, he's very intelligent for his age, and Koto's reports on his level of improvement further exemplify his level of skill and strength. I would say more, but I'm not the most suitable to do so." The Hokage nodded his head and looked at my teacher before instructing her to proceed. "Yes, Lord Hokage, Yoro has shown incredible skills in combat, and has obeyed all orders given to him without question. During our first night guarding Kusa, he was able to defeat 2 older Chunin-level fighters, killing one of them and capturing the other, and for the next couple weeks, any skirmishes he fought in were all won. During the siege against Iwa's forces stationed at the volcano, Yoro was able to defeat a member of the Explosion Corps who had Jonin levels of chakra based on his description. Afterward, he met up and used his medical ninjutsu to heal me and our other colleague before safely transporting us back to base. Since then, he has continued to perform excellently in the field, and has never been neglectful in his duties. It was honestly kind of weird when someone talked about you so positively even though you were right there." The third Hokage smiled lightly before sighing, "It is honestly regretful that we have to send children out in the front lines. However, I am pleased to hear about your sublime performance." "Thank you for your praise, Lord Hokage," I said with a bow. "I couldn't break etiquette." The man nodded his head before regarding me, "As a result of your performance, I can grant you a single request within reason, of course." I thought for a moment before shaking my head. There currently wasn't much that I needed, and all the things that I did need could be provided by my teacher, so there was no need to ask the Hokage anything. The old man nodded his head at my response before turning to Koto. "What say you?" That was more of an ending statement than a question, but Koto actually spoke up, "Actually, Lord Hokage, if I may be so bold as to ask to speak to you alone." The Hokage looked at her deeply before nodding and looking at me, "Very well then, Yoro, you are dismissed. Your mission payment will be given to your handler, but aside from that, congratulations on the completion of your first assignment. Main quest complete. Secure the borders. Reward, 500,000 EXP, skill book. You have leveled up by 1. 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 Skill book has been placed in your inventory." I bowed my head, "Thank you for your praise, Lord Hokage." And with that, I left the building. I took a sigh as I thought about my first mission and wondered what I could do for the remainder of the day till Koto came back. I racked my brain for a moment before I came up with a simple plan of activities. For starters, I needed to check up on Minato and Kushina to see if the baby had been born yet. I hoped it hadn't yet, cause it would have really sucked miss it. With that, I made my way over to the Namikaze/Uzumaki household with a simply body flicker. I arrived in front of their household door and knocked on it a few times. After about a moment, I heard the gears of the door unlocking before a mop of red hair made its way into view. The owner of the hair looked down before smiling. "Yoru, I'm glad you're back, please come in," Kushina stated with a bright smile. I nodded my head and looked at her stomach before making my way inside. "Thank you for your hospitality." The woman in question rolled her eyes before replying, "You've got to stop being so uptight, we're no longer strangers, but enough of that. I'm glad you decided to drop by after coming back from your mission. Tell me, how was it?" "I suppose it was all right," I stated as I sat down on a couch. The woman scoffed as she sat down next to me. "I highly doubt it. The first mission any shinobi takes is usually her worst. Tell me, how are you coping with your first mission?" The way she said that made it seem like she already knew that I had taken a life, but I suppose it didn't take much to infer that point. I lightly shook my head and replied, "I'm fine." Before I knew it, Kushina wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug to her side. "This is unnecessary." "Oh, hush you." And with that, we lapsed into silence. Eventually, the red-haired woman let me go, which allowed me to ask, "Is Mr. Namikaze not around?" Kushina's expression suddenly changed as shadows covered her eyes, and her hair started to flail wildly in 9 parts. "That little, he has been avoiding me with every excuse he could make up. He's in the training ground right now training his team, but I know he's just there to get away from me. If I wasn't 10 months pregnant." She gnashed her teeth in anger. I looked up to her and asked curiously, "Why would he want to stay away from you though? You are an incredible woman, UGH. I suddenly found myself in a vice-grip hug with Kushina rubbing her cheeks against mine, her previously angry expression suddenly gone. "Oh Yoru, you're so sweet. I can only hope my baby learns from you." Suddenly she released me and looked at my face seriously. "You're going to take care of my baby girl, all right?" she asked as she tightly gripped my shoulders. The force of her hands was so much that I felt like my bones will break, so I hastily nodded my head in agreement. The woman's serious face disappeared in an instant, replaced with a genuine smile. "That's good then. Make sure you teach her properly. I think I know why he stayed away." Suddenly she froze up and looked at me intently. "Yoru." An unholy premonition washed over me, which was promptly answered as she stated calmly, "My water broke." "Oh fuck me." I instantly created a shadow clone, and had it shunch into the training grounds to get Minato. While my memories were screwed up, I remembered that Kushina was the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, which meant that at this moment her seal was at its weakest. She looked at me with a strained smile as she held her stomach. This was actually faster than expected, but it a good thing we already prepared contingencies for something like this dash. "Kushina!" a voice yelled as Minato slammed open the door to his house and entered, my clone in tow. That was fast, I thought, but when my clone dispelled, I understood why he had been able to get Minato here so quickly. All he had to do was say the words "her water broke" and Minato body flickered here so fast, it was as if he had already recreated the Flying Thunder God technique. While my musings happened nearly instantaneously, Minato had already created a clone and sent it off, probably to tell the Hokage or something, before he held his wife's hand and looked at me with sweat dripping from his brows. "Thank you so much, Yoru, but I'll have to move Kushina someplace else. In the meantime, you can stay here and wait for us to come back." And without even waiting for my reply, he disappeared. Huh. I shrugged and sat down on the couch with my mind running through a few things. For one, I always forgot to look at Minato and Kushina's level, but I suppose since I could see them every day there wasn't really any need to rush. Afterward, I remembered that I had gotten a skill book as a reward for the mission, so I opened my inventory and looked through it for a moment before finding what I wanted. With a mental click, a scroll appeared in front of me and I scrutinized it. I wondered what was inside the skill books given to me by my doppelganger. My curiosity got the best of me, so I opened the scroll and promptly closed it shut. Ugh, what was that? I thought as my head throbbed severely. When I had opened the scroll, all I remember seeing were a bunch of extremely complex mathematical equations, diagrams, and algorithms that my brain could not even begin to process. It immediately caused me a headache, so I decided to forego that endeavor and just learn the skill the old-fashioned way. Would you like to learn the skill ID create? Y/N. Would you like to learn the skill ID escape? Y/N. I suppose that if I were to actually try and create these skills myself, I would probably have to understand those equations. I shook my head and simply pressed Y for both prompts. Immediately, the scroll turned into dots of light which floated and entered my cranium, giving me the knowledge about how to operate these two skills. Congratulations, you have learned the skill ID create. Congratulations, you have learned the skill ID escape. ID create active LVL1 0.00%. ID create is used to create instant dungeons. Instant dungeons are mirrors of the real world that you can travel and train. Since they are mirrors of the actual world, when you exit the ID, you'll find yourself in the same area you were at in the ID. Stronger instant dungeons may be created at higher levels. Available instant dungeons. Empty ID, monsters, none. Zombie ID, monsters, zombies. Cost 200 CP. ID, escape, active, LVL1, 0.00%. ID, escape is used to escape instant dungeons. These skills. Obviously, leveling up against zombies and getting potential rare drops was great and all, but all leveling did for me was give me stat points to use, and I could just as easily train my skills with shadow clones. I honestly would get better increases in strength through training, but I would have to find a more effective way to train since my regular routine was becoming less and less effective. Anyways, for me, this skill was a hidden card in hand that I could use to escape from battles and sneak attack enemies. I could even go inside IWA right now and walk into their Tsuchikage building without getting caught, though once I left the ID, I would probably be immediately killed. Regardless, this ability was immensely useful even if I wasn't going to use it for its typical purpose. With that all said and done, I continued to laze in the couch while thinking about other things, like how I would go about regrowing a lost limb using medical ninjutsu. To be honest, I had already considered an avenue to explore for this dilemma, one which had been marinating in my mind for some time. Natural energy. It was all around us and extremely powerful, but most importantly, it increased the strength of techniques by a good margin. What if I could incorporate natural energy into something like the Mystic Palm technique to increase its effectiveness? The only issue was finding out how to incorporate it into my techniques without turning myself or others into stone. Well, I would have to worry about that once I could actually start sensing the stuff. And like that time passed by, my mind wandering in all directions. When I was in the deepest recesses of my thoughts, a voice called out to me. Yoru. My eyes snapped open to see the smiling yet tired and defeated-looking Minato Namikaze. Mr. Namikaze. The man panted lightly before replying, "We'll work on having you call me Minato, but for now I'm just here to let you know that Mito Uzumaki Namikaze has been born." I raised a brow. No Naruto, oh well. I looked him up and down before asking, "And you came all the way here to tell me that?" The man chuckled before shaking his head. "No, I'm just a clone, the real me is in some emotional turmoil, so to speak." Well, that got me curious. May I ask why? I thought that the birth of your child would be purely a joyous occasion. The clone Minato strained a smile. Normally that would be the case, if it had been a boy. Yeah, that's right, they had that bet. While in this era boys were preferred to girls, Minato wasn't that type of man, at least I didn't think he was. The main issue was that Kushina and Minato had made a bet a few weeks back, before I left for my mission, about what gender the baby would be when it was born. I didn't hear what Kushina had told Minato she would do if he won and the baby was a boy, but that didn't matter since the baby turned out to be a girl. I looked at Minato plainly. So you're upset that you're going to have to be on night duty every night when you are home? The man nodded in exhaustion. Trust me, Yoro, when you have a child, you will understand how horrific night duty is. Right. Minato sighed. I guess you're too young, but that's not the only reason I am here. Both my original and our wife are currently at Konoha Hospital, and since we are like family, we thought you would like to see the baby. My eyes widened slightly before I nodded my head. Minato clone smiled at me before taking my hand and leading me to the entrance of the hospital in a shunshin. We walked in and checked in with the staff before he led me to a hospital room door. Well, this is where my job ends. Just a heads up though, the Hokage is inside, so make sure to be polite before you enter. I nodded my head in thanks, to which the clone smiled and poofed out of existence. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door before waiting for a response, and just a few moments later I got my affirmation. Come in. I noted that it was Minato's voice, but he probably knew it was me cause of the shadow clone. Excuse me, I'm coming in. I said as I opened the door, noting for inhabitants, Hirozen, Minato, Kushina, and a little creature cuddled up in Kushina's arms. They obviously noted me as well, with the Hokage giving me a light smile and nodding before turning back to Kushina and stating, well, that is what she suggested, so what do you think about it? Feel free to take a little bit to think about it. After all, you've just given birth, and this might impact your maternal duties. Is that even a question? Kushina replied before she looked at me with a bright smile. Of course I agree to that proposal, and it doesn't really affect me too much either. My area of expertise won't require physical effort to teach, so it won't impact my duties much at all. The old Hokage smiled lightly. Then that's good. I'll let her know that you agreed. I am glad for your safe delivery, so please do cherish your child. Of course, Lord Hokage. Minato replied with a smile, will always cherish her. The old man smiled and walked out the room, leaving me there with the small family. Well, what are you standing there for? Come over here. Kushina stated, motioning for me to come towards her. I did as asked and looked at the baby, so innocent and so cute, I couldn't help but gently caress her cheeks with my finger. She's pretty. She is, isn't she? Kushina stated, looking at her daughter lovingly. Make sure you take care of her well, she's like your little sister, you know? I nodded my head, of course. And like that we lapsed into a short silence, watching the baby slumber peacefully. It only lasted a moment, however, as I thought about the conversation they had earlier. If you don't mind me asking, what was the Hokage talking to you about? Of course, if it's confidential then I understand. Kushina shook her head. No, nothing of the sort. As a matter of fact, it has to do with you. At my raised brow, she continued, Koto had notified the Hokage about your unique bloodline, and about how you don't need sleep to function as a result. Is that what she talked to him about when I left? Kushina, of course, couldn't hear my thoughts, so she continued, she convinced the Hokage that you would benefit from a double partnership of me and her teaching you. She could teach you in the early mornings, and I at night, and it even works out well since I'll be up at night with this little rascal anyway. She finished, cooing at her baby. My eyes widened at her statement, however. Wait, you mean? Yep. I'll be your second instructor, primarily focusing on Fuinjutsu. Koto has stated that your calligraphy has been coming along perfectly, and the few you've shown us has convinced me that you may actually be able to go far in his art. From now on you can call me Kushina-sensei. You know I've never had a genin team before, so I've never been called that, you know. I looked deeply at Kushina before bowing. Thank you. My body suddenly found itself in Kushina's embrace as she chuckled. There's no need to be so formal, we're like family after all. She's right. Minato stated, remaking his presence known, we all are family, so you don't have to thank us for something like this. I nodded, to which he patted my head before sighing, I wish I could stay here for a bit longer, but I kinda left my team hanging in the forest. I dosed a brow. You didn't send a clone to get them? No, I did, but... The man rubbed his forehead. Kakashi didn't want to come because he felt that this was a family moment. Because of that, Rin decided she didn't want to come, and because of that Obito decided he didn't want to either. So now they're just at the training grounds waiting for me. I looked at him blankly. I see. Minato looked helpless, but he soon smiled and kissed his newborn daughter before doing the same to Kushina and leaving the room. I lapsed into another round of silence as I idly played with the baby before Kushina spoke up. You know, you should get back to your apartment. I'm sure Koto would like to talk to you about our partnership. I nodded my head, but looked at her and newborn Mito before Kushina rolled her eyes. Go. I'll be fine by myself for a little bit. I took a light breath before hugging her once more. Thank you for everything. Before she could even move to scold me about thanking her, I quickly walked out the door and body flickered back home. I pulsed my chakra, sensing a presence inside the apartment, so I walked in. Ah, Yoru, you're back. Koto stated from the small living room table as she placed groceries on it. You know, it's been a while since I've had a taste of your cooking. All preserved food we usually eat on missions gets old real fast, and they don't even taste good. She hadn't turned around to confirm if she was really speaking to me, but I supposed that being such a good censor had its perks. I walked up to the woman and gave her a hug. Thanks for everything. Honestly, displays of affection made me feel kind of weird, but I was truthfully very grateful towards all of them, and this was the only way I knew how to show it. Koto's body slightly froze and she turned around awkwardly in order to pat my head. I know how much you want to get stronger, so I will do whatever I can in helping you with that goal. Who knows? One day I might need to be saved, and all the effort I put into helping you grow will allow you to rescue me. Don't talk about such a cliché scenario. My teacher laughed as I released her from my hold. All right, kid, I won't, but what I will talk about it how much I want your cooking. She stated with a wink. I looked at her plainly before replying, sure. And so, for the remainder of the day, I relaxed with my teacher at home and gracing her with my incredible cooking skills. It was the first relaxing day I had had in a while, and I cherished every moment of it. For days passed since Mito Uzumaki Namike's birth, with Kushina staying in the hospital for around 2 of those days. For the most part, I had slowly gotten back into my schedule for training with Koto, and since Kushina was out of the hospital, this would be the first night I would spend learning from her. So here I was in front of Minato and Kushina's home about to learn Fuinjutsu from the master herself. Koto had let me go earlier than usual, probably due to that fact. I placed my hand on the side of the door and flared my chakra, which rewarded me with a click as the door unlocked and opened for me. Seals sure are convenient. I thought as I made my way inside the house, but I noticed that the house was dark. Why did this feel familiar? Happy birthday! The lights suddenly came on and before my eyes were the figures of Kushina and baby Mito. I know that it's not as lively as the last one, but I figured this would be the best way to start your apprenticeship. Now come on. I've got something for you. Without even waiting for me to reply, she walked deeper into the house, and I followed her until she reached the living room where she stopped. I have a gift for you, but it is also going to be your first step in learning Fuinjutsu. That sounds more like homework than an actual gift. Hush, now here you go. And with a snap of her fingers, a large book puffed into her hands. Seeing my raised brow, she grinned. Storage seal on the hands. Pretty simple stuff once you know how to do it, and I'll make sure you do. The first step to doing that, however, is to memorize everything in this book. There was a nostalgic smile on her face as she looked at it, and now that I paid attention, I noticed it was kind of worn out as well. This was a gift given to me by the leader of my clan before I moved here, and unfortunately it's the only physical remnant of them that I have left. I stayed silent at that as I didn't know what else to say, before Kushina shook her head. Anyway, just make sure you know every single detail about this book like the back of your hand. If not, I won't be able to teach you anything. I took the book from her hand and flipped through it quickly just to get a glimpse of it, and noted that it had a good amount of information. pictures and descriptions of a multitude of common seals, explanations about the variety of brush strokes in each of their applications, and an in-depth analysis about the applications of chakra in seal making. It was an encyclopedia of seal-making knowledge that seemed to cover all of the theoretical aspects of fuinjutsu. Also, as a result, when I said it was large, I meant large. I looked back at Kushina blandly and she replied with a shrug, "We all had to go through it at some point, so you better start now. It's not going to read itself, you know." "I suppose not," I said as I placed the book down on the floor and sat down to read. I felt Kushina's pat my head before she left me, parting with a few words. "Have fun." I lightly sighed but focused on the task at hand. To be honest, I wasn't worried about being unable to retain all this information since I had eidetic memory. It would literally just be a matter of time, and I was actually very interested in the world of fuinjutsu. I mean, you could summon a death god with this stuff. What couldn't it do? With my stats that were far above a normal human being's, it wouldn't actually take long for me to finish reading the book, a few hours at most. I suppose Kushina expected me to take a while to memorize all the information, but that was a non-issue, so I continued to read the book. As I delved deeper into the literature, I had to admit that the concepts about fuinjutsu were fascinating, but also made this craft dangerous. The slightest error in a stroke, no more than even a millimeter, could cause an entirely different effect to occur, according to the book at least. There was also the fact that you had to input the right amount of chakra into each stroke for the desired effect. Too much or too little chakra at worst would cause the seal to blow up in your face, and at best the seal would be dysfunctional. Not only that, you had to pay attention to the amount of ink you use per inscription as well. There were so many little rules and tidbits to remember that it was no wonder Kushina simply left me here alone. Any normal man would have taken weeks to remember all this information. Fortunately, I wasn't any normal man. I wasn't even a man. I was 6. As soon as I finished reading the book after around 4 or so hours, I closed it and shut my eyes before shifting through the information. A barely noticeable smile dawned my lips as all the information I had read through was easily recallable and could be grasped at any moment. Eidetic memory was such a cheat. I carefully picked up the book and closed it before making my way towards where Kushina was. There she was, in the kitchen, cradling a sleeping Mito in her arms with a smile on her face. Without even turning towards me, she asked quietly, "Is there anything wrong, Yoro? You stuck on something?" I looked at the adorable red-haired creature in her arms before shaking my head. "No, there's nothing wrong, I've just finished." Kushina immediately stopped cradling the baby as she turned to look at me closely. "Finished?" I nodded my head. "Yes, I've finished memorizing the book. I have an eidetic memory, so I don't forget anything I see," I explained to her. I could see her expression change a couple times ever so subtly, from amazement to pride, then to envy and annoyance before she looked at me sharply. "What are the kanji of elements that compose the 5 elements seal and unseal?" I immediately replied, "The elements used are more symbolic than anything, as the seal formula can differ from person to person. The most commonly seen kind of 5 element seals use either the 5 movements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, or the 5 greats, Godai: earth, water, fire, wind, and lightning. However, even though I say common, it takes an incredible deal of skill to learn and master the skill, so it really isn't seen much at all." Kushina looked at me deeply before asking another question: "What are the recommended thickness levels of the symbols used for the enclosing seal?" 2.5 millimeters in thickness. "And how many symbols do you create?" "It depends on the size of the object you want to store, but it usually amounts to 6 to 10 symbols, with more symbols used the larger the object. She paused for a moment, probably thinking of some random question to ask before she finally did. "How much ink is needed to create an explosive tag with a blast radius of 3 meters? I barely had to think before I replied. "Generally speaking, the amount of ink needed for that would be close to 3 milliliters, but that could differ depending on the skill level of the seal master his/herself. And say I wanted to blow up a town with a single explosive tag, would that be possible? I shook my head. It takes approximately 1 milliliter of ink to create an explosive tag with a 1 meter blast radius, so theoretically it is possible to create one with a 1000 meter blast radius or more. However, you would not only need approximately a liter of ink, but you would also need paper durable enough to handle all that moisture without tearing. That's not even mentioning the amount of time and skill that would have to go into making such a seal, due to the fact that every stroke would have to be perfect, and having to use all that ink would drastically increase the likelihood of error, rendering all the previous efforts null, as you would have to restart the production of the seal if a mistake were to occur. Theoretically, it would be possible, but realistically speaking, it would be highly improbable. It would be more effective to just pack thousands of explosive tags. Kushina sighed deeply and looked at me with pursed lips. And you say you don't want people to call you a genius, but if you aren't a genius then almost no one is qualified to be so. I don't deny that I have natural abilities that place me above most others. I started. But I prefer to think that I worked for all my skills, and that they weren't just installed into me. After all, it's not like the knowledge in this book suddenly appeared in my head as I still had to read through the text. I conveniently ignored the fact that I literally learned many skills that way. Kushina looked at me with a smile. It's so cute when you get all defensive, she stated, rubbing my head. I'm not defensive. Kushina rolled her eyes before putting on a thoughtful expression. I really didn't prepare anything else since I thought this would take you a while. She then sighed. I suppose I can come up with something for tomorrow, but for now I guess you can do something? She seemed kind of troubled that she had nothing for me, so I asked her, Mr. Namikaze is still on that mission, correct? Abruptly, her expression darkened and her hair began to flail wildly in 9 parts. That man. The first night he's supposed to have night duty and he suddenly decides to take a mission? When he comes back. She muttered a bunch of phrases inappropriate for children before she calmed down and looked at me. Yes, he's still out, and I have no idea when he's coming back. She grit her teeth at that last part. I see. I stated before looking at the sleeping form of Mito. Since you don't have anything more for me to do, I can look after her for the night if you wish. I don't really need sleep after all, so I won't mind. Kushina's eyes widened before her expression softened, and she scooped me up in a constricting hug. Oh, you're so sweet, Yoroko-kun. So much more dependable than that lazy bastard who runs away from his responsibilities. Her free arm contradicted tighter against me. This is unnecessary. Oh, hush you. Now if only my daughter can grow up to be like you. She sighed before smiling and letting me go before carefully placing her daughter in my care. I trust that you'll take care of her, and if she's hungry, there's her milk in the fridge. Now I can finally get some sleep. She yawned as she stood up, stretched and walked to her room, leaving me with her adorable child. I'm glad she places so much trust in me, I thought as I cradled the baby. Her adorable rosy cheeks and beautiful shirt red hair, I couldn't resist rubbing her face and hair with my finger. I'm going to dote on you so much. Let it be said that I loved adorable things, they were my weakness. I went to the living room and sat down on the couch carefully as I did not want to wake the child. Now that I had some free time, I decided to get a couple things out of the way. I was supposed to learn from Kushina for however long necessary, then go back to Koto's place, but I abruptly changed that, so I created a clone, and had it let Koto know about my situation. Next, I created another clone, and had it go to Konoha's public library. It was currently 11 o'clock at night and Konoha's public library closed at 12 o'clock. My plan was to have my clone read through all the books about chakra theory. It also had eidetic memory, so all that information would be easily recalled by me once they dispelled. I needed to get as much information as possible, so that I could try and improve upon my medical ninjutsu. Finally, I created 14 more clones, and had them go outside and practice my skills in the back of the Namikaze Uzumaki compound. I needed to figure out if my theory about 100% chakra control was correct, and the only way to do that was to practice my elemental skills until my natural affinities reached level 100. I still only had my water and lightning skills, so I would have to ask my teacher for the other elemental skills to practice. With that, I laid back into the couch, while idly caressing the baby's face with my finger. I couldn't help but look up to the ceiling and thought, this place isn't so bad. Chapter 9. It is possible for a powerful seal master to manifest Fuinjutsu seals in the air and ground by molding their chakra in specific ways. However, this requires a not only mastery over seals as a whole but usually a medium to complete the effect. It is a skill you will be able to perfect down the road, so keep up at it. Kushina encouraged me with a smile and a pat on the head. I nodded as I mentally took this information to heart. Time had flown by quickly in between training with Kodo and Kushina, going on missions, and compiling all the information I had found in the library. Currently, I was in another nightly teaching session with Kushina, who was imparting some tidbits of information about the intricacies of the advanced sealing arts. I looked down on the blank piece of paper and placed my hand on it while molding my chakra. I forced the energy to move and bend to my desires and noticed how glowing blue symbols started to appear on the paper, spreading from my palm. My mind rapidly analyzed, reconfigured, and constructed the seal I wanted to create and its effects while simultaneously managing my flow of energy onto the blank slate. Slowly the lines of Fuinjutsu script stopped spreading, and a light drop of sweat formed on my forehead from the effort exhibited by my brain. I breathed out a large sigh and forced myself to stop as my head began to throb, but soon after I recovered and looked at my masterpiece. You really are. Kushina started with a shake of her head as she examined the seal, to be able to get this far only after a few weeks of practice when it usually takes years. She grumbled and narrowed her eyes at my work, a 1.55mm thickness uniform throughout and layered in a triple column matrix, a synchronized algorithm to target the opponent's released energy, and pre-programmed to act on the creator's command with a runtime proportionate to the amount of chakra or energy absorbed. Kushina nodded her head in appreciation. I see, I can confidently decipher around 70% of that, but the rest would take me some time to understand. You mind explaining what exactly it is supposed to be? I looked down at my failed masterpiece before replying. It is supposed to target and absorb all the kinetic energy produced by the being that it is placed upon, effectively paralyzing them. I was trying to improve upon the tradition immobilization seal due to the fact that it is quite easy to break through it with brute force, but unfortunately, I mentally went through many variables and calculations before shaking my head. I came up slightly short. Short, you say? Kushina looked at the seal before she seemingly understood what I meant. Alright, there's no stabilization array to control the influx of energy, nor are the limiter seals completed, but still. Stab's red-haired woman gave me a large smile. You did amazing, Yoro. Thank you, Kushina. I replied awkwardly. I could see her grin widen. Hee. No need to look so awkward. I'm allowing you to call me that, you know. Can I go back to calling you Mrs. Uzumaki? Denied. I sighed while Kushina looked triumphant for some reason. Alright, it's about time you get yourself going. We're all set today. You really improved drastically, you know? I can't say that I'm surprised, but I'm impressed nonetheless. Thank you for your praise. I said lightly as I stood up from the Seiza position I had been sitting in on the ground. I looked back at Kushina, who was standing up as well, before I asked, I take it that Minato is taking care of Mito tonight then? Kushina sneered. Hee, that man won't be able to run away from his responsibilities, so don't worry about Mito tonight. Her expression then softened. You have no idea how thankful I am for your help in taking care of her in the past whenever Minato wasn't around. You've really been a great help for me, and I appreciate that, she stated while gently patting my short white hair. Anytime, Kushina, there's no need to be thankful, she's so cute that I don't mind anyway. Kushina raises a brow. What was that? She eyed me suspiciously before relenting. Fine, whatever. Since you don't want to tell me then, shoo, she stated, waving me off. I smiled underneath my face mask before stating, thanks for everything. Have a good night, Kushina. And with that, I left the house in a body flicker. In no time, I appeared in front of the apartment and immediately entered the building. The interior of the home was dimly lit, the full moon radiating its light through the living room windows. As soon as I opened the door to the bedroom, my detect danger pinged softly, warning me of an incoming projectile heading for my face. I lazily raised my hand and deftly snagged the kunai from midair before twirling it on my fingers. "Really, Yoro, can't you knock or something?" Koto said with a yawn as she leaned up from her napping position while rubbing her eyes. The moonlight shining from the small window above the bed allowed me to see the bedsheets slide down from her body, providing me with an uncensored view of her toned, well-proportioned and well-endowed upper body. Well, it wasn't like I hadn't already seen it like 1,000 times already. The result would have been the same. I replied blandly while closing the door behind me. You wouldn't have moved to open the door, and I would have to come in regardless. The trap would still trigger and attack me. I could see her roll her eyes. Whatever, just come to bed and sleep or something. Not everyone can survive without sleep, you know. She yawned tiredly at the end before slumping back to her bed. I shrugged and removed my shinobi sandals before slipping into bed. Sometimes, I lamented the fact that I was only 6.5. Oh well, time always flows forward. And with that thought, I went to sleep. Thank you so much for your help, little Yoro. Our workload always decreases substantially when you come here to help. The medic Nin said to me as I focused on stabilizing the wounds on one of the returnee shinobi. My focus never left the injured man as I replied softly, "I'm glad to be of service, you don't have to thank me. This helps me train my mystic palm technique further to perfection anyway." The medic Nin smiled while rubbing my head. "Oh, you're so adorable, Yoro. Who doesn't know that your mystic palm technique is the strongest of any staff here? Well, keep up the good work, I have to go check up on the others. Don't be ashamed to take a break when you feel exhausted, okay? You're already overtaxing yourself with the number of shadow clones you are deploying." "Sure." The beautiful medic Nin lady gave me a smile and began to walk away. It was currently Saturday, and I was at Konoha Hospital helping the staff take care of the influx of injured personnel as best as I could. This hospital was the place where I learned the mystic palm technique, and as a result, I felt the need to repay them for their kindness and devotion in teaching me. The effects of the war were already visibly evident as the amount of injured being sent into the hospital had begun to strain the staff, so I did what I could to help, which mainly included me sending clones off everywhere. As I finished up the treatment of the individual, my hands began to stop glowing in their light green hue, and I watched as the expression on the shinobi's face became much laxer. With a nod, I stood up and rolled my shoulder before looking around to see if there were any more individuals who needed my attention. Suddenly, however, my vision stopped roaming as I gazed upon the familiar back of a brown-haired figure. "Is that?" I thought as I began to walk towards her. As I stood beside her, I noted how serious her countenance was as she administered first aid to the injured shinobi she was with. A small bead of sweat traveled down her face as she utilized the mystic palm technique to quickly heal the injured man's wounds. After a few moments, she wiped away the sweat before smiling. "There, that should do it." I looked at her before calling her softly, "Rin." His body immediately seized before she stood up and turned around, looking at me with a surprised expression on her face. "Yoro. You're here." I nodded my head. "I'm always here on the weekend." Rin scratched the back of her head sheepishly. Sometimes I forget that even though I see you here every week." She shook her head before she began to walk ahead, a smile on her face. "Well, are you ready for today's session? Today is you and me versus Obito and Kakashi, correct?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, of course. "Yep," she replied cheerily before settling down and continuing, "But first, I'd like to help out here a little longer if that's all right." I nodded and replied quietly, "Of course, I too will help out as much as possible." I could see the woman smile and reply to my response before she continued her walk around the hospital, looking for and helping any patients that needed care or nurses that needed help. I followed her as well and did my part in healing the injured while occasionally recreating clones to replace the ones that had exhausted themselves. Rin and I continued this for a few more hours, until the hospital staff was finally able to manage the influx of patients. We exited the building soon after and headed towards the Namikaze Uzumaki estate, prompting Rin to comment ecstatically, "I can't wait to see baby Mito again. She's so adorable, I could just pinch her soft cheeks and play with her all day." "She is quite adorable," I stated, a light smile on my face. "I can't wait to see her either." "Right," Rin stated brightly as we eventually came upon the building. The brown-haired girl looked back at me with a smile as she approached the door. "Come on, let's see if the other two are here yet." She placed a hand on the side of it and flared her chakra as the door opened up soon after. We entered the house and walked towards the common room of the large home, noting that Kakashi and Obito were laying about, the former sharpening his kunai and the latter wiping his orange goggles. They stopped what they were doing as they saw our figures, Kakashi giving us a once-over. "You're late," he stated blandly. Sorry Kakashi, the hospital was very busy today, so Yoru and I kind of got caught up in it all," the short-haired girl replied. Obito slipped on his goggles before leveling a hard glare at Kakashi. "Oi Kakashi. Rin was just doing her part to serve the village. I bet she helped out the most in healing our injured comrades." No actually a dash. "Where are Minato and Kushina?" I asked, centralizing the attention towards me. Use honorifics, damn it." I ignored the Uchiha in favor of the Hatake, who glanced at me apathetically. "Sensei said to meet him at the training grounds when you get here." As for his wife, Kakashi put on a thoughtful expression before continuing, "I think she left with the baby to run errands or something." "That's unfortunate," I started, somewhat mournfully. "I was looking forward to playing with Mito." "Oi, don't ignore me." I looked at Rin. "I suppose we'll have to wait till a little before seeing her." The brown-haired girl nodded with a sigh. "It's unfortunate, but she'll be back eventually, so when we might have a chance to see her when we're done with today," she stated, perking up at the end. "You all are so mean," Obito stated as a dark cloud hovered over his head, and he poked the floor with a stick. "Wait, where did he even get that? We're indoors." I shook my head from those thoughts before stating, "We should get a move on. I'm sure that Minato has been waiting for us." "I agree," Kakashi stated as he stood up and grabbed a startled Obito's shoulder. Before the Uchiha could voice his complaints, the silver-haired Chunin disappeared in a swirl of leaves. I looked at the place they occupied before turning my gaze towards Rin. "Let's go." Wait Yoru. Ignoring her pleas, I placed a hand on her shoulder and revitalized my body with chakra before traveling towards the training ground in a burst of high speed. "Why Yuri, eso, mean?" Rin said in between pants as she tried to seemingly keep herself from throwing up. "Oi, why you bastard, how could you be so urgh?" Obito vomited rainbows before he could finish his statement, all the while Kakashi looked disinterested standing beside him. I gave a side glance to the duo before suddenly pulling out a kunai. I saw everyone tense at my action before I rapidly threw it towards my 1 o'clock, causing the projectile to fly through the trees. I could hear it travel as it rustled many of the leaves in its path before it seemingly stopped with a thump. "Oi, what's the bright idea?" Obito started heatedly as he wiped the vomit from his mouth. "You scared me, man, that was totally uncalled for." Instead of replying to him, however, I looked to the trees and spoke. "I'm assuming you tried to suppress your chakra in order to avoid my detection, and that might have worked on me a couple months ago, however." I paused, turning my head to look at my 11 o'clock. "My sensory capabilities have evolved drastically, so that sort of maneuver won't work on me anymore." Energy resonance, passive, LV5, 5.45%. Energy resonance is the evolved form of chakra sonar, and is useful for the same purpose of detecting living beings with energy and for scouting, effectively making the user a sensor. Every living being radiated some form of energy which vibrates at certain unique frequencies, which produces a resonance with the surroundings that the user can sense. This skill increases in distance by 100 meters per level and costs no CP. Maximum range, 1,500 meters. Don't be so sure, Yoru. A voice said behind me, causing my eyes to widen. I quickly turned around as a blonde-haired man placed a hand on my shoulders and couldn't help but comment, "How did you?" However, at that moment, the signature I had sensed at my 11 o'clock suddenly disappeared. That other signature was a shadow clone. I thought intently. That still didn't explain how I missed his chakra signature though. Minato smiled at me. A good shinobi never reveals his secrets, but I'll give you a little hint. Minato stated, giving me a wink before he continued, "I was everywhere." I hummed thoughtfully for a few moments, during which Minato walked ahead and gave Kakashi a light pat on the shoulder before standing in front of all four of us, me, Kakashi, Rin, and Obito. I was broken from my muse as the blonde began to speak, "Yoru and Rin versus Obito and Kakashi." Minato started, a grin framing his face. "Today's challenge will be to see which group can complete 10 laps around the village the quickest in under 30 minutes. The rules are that both you and your partner must complete the trail together, and on your last lap, you are to come back to this spot. When this kunai," Minato said, pulling out the weapon from his pouch, "hits the ground, that's your signal to start. Any questions?" I narrowed my eyes at that innocent smiling face that Minato wore. There had to be much more to today's team exercise than he was giving on. I was led to believe that each challenge was to help foster bonds and promote cooperation between us as Konoha shinobi. How exactly does running laps achieve that? I asked. Minato beamed even brighter. "Well, you know what they say, you can't understand someone unless you've run 2,400 kilometers in their shoes. Anything else?" "I'm pretty sure that's not how it goes." I thought, meanwhile, noting how Obito and Rin shuddered from Minato's smile, and even Kakashi looked slightly uneasy. It made me wonder if he was in a bad mood because he was definitely planning something nefarious. Maybe Kushina hadn't been giving him the time of day? That would be hilarious. Well, we still got this, alright, Kakashi?" Obito stated in faux courage. HN. You're not filling me with confidence. Say something. I enjoyed their antics for a moment before I felt a tug in my shirt. "Hey, Minato-sensei's acting weird, isn't he?" Rin asked me from behind. I put on a thoughtful expression. "We'll see what he has planned eventually. Don't worry though, we should be able to win this if we play it right." She nodded uneasily right before we all heard a clap as Minato slapped his hands together. "Now then, are you ready?" I could see him smile as we all adopted serious expressions. "Alright then, here we go." With that said, he threw his kunai in the air and time seemed to slow as we all watched it descend due to gravity. As it inched closer to the floor, I tensed in preparation. However, the moment it touched the ground, I knew something was wrong. My vision suddenly swam as a wave of nausea slammed into my body, and I suddenly felt a cold sweat coming down my face. "Wadash! You have been afflicted with a negative status condition, vertigo severe. Vertigo. Decreases CC by 90%. Decreases DEX by 90%. Decreases movement speed by 90%. Yoru. Kakashi." I heard Rin scream before a sudden headache appeared, causing me to lose focus as I fell to a knee. I took in large gulps of air in order to ease the conditions. However, it was useless. "Oi, sensei! What's going on?" Obito yelled heatedly. "I like to call them Vertigo Seals," Minato stated, causing me to shakily look up at him. "Vertigo Seals?" The man looked back at me with a smile as angelic and bright as the sun, yet I could only see the cruel visage of a demon spawned from the depths of hell. "Yep. As long as I can place it near your ear, the seal will disrupt the chakra flowing through the chakra coils located near that area and you'll experience severe vertigo. You and Kakashi are usually the ones who carry your teams, so you'll sit on the back burner for this one." I slowly looked towards Kakashi's down form as ringing persisted in my ears and couldn't help but wonder, when did he wait? I suddenly remembered that he had patted my shoulder after I had incorrectly located him, and no sooner did he pat Kakashi's shoulder, "Is that when?" He said, "It has to be near the ear." I was forcibly broken from my epiphany as another wave of nausea crashed my body, causing me to double over further. Yoro! Rin yelled as she gently laid me down, and I could feel her try to heal me with mystic palm, yet my nausea did not subside one bit. Why isn't it working? She yelled distraughtly, to which the blonde Namake spoke up. What's causing his ailment isn't an external or internal wound, but a seal. The only way you could heal him would be to either win the race, break the seal through brute force, or solve the seal. Minato stated casually before remarking, though seeing as you only have 28 minutes remaining, I don't think you'll have enough time to get proficient enough in the art to solve my formula, and Yoro isn't in the best condition to help himself. I couldn't tell what her expression was like from my face-down position, but I imagined she bit her lips. At that moment, Obito asked, what happens if we lose? The atmosphere suddenly turned bright, yet hidden within was a deep dark maliciousness. I could only imagine the deceptively sincere expression on Minato's face as he replied cheerily, the losing team will have both of its members carry the seal for the rest of the day, and if both teams lose, well. I could almost feel his grin grow wider as he continued, you'll all have to deal with Vertigo for the day, won't you? Sensei. Oi, what did we ever do to you? Obito asked in trepidation. I'm sexually frustrated. What? 57 minutes. EEP. Rin and Obito yelled while I tried to pretend that I didn't hear Minato mutter with my enhanced sense of hearing. I felt an arm wrap around my waist as my body was lifted, my arm wrapped around Rin's shoulder. Come on Yoro, we have to move if you don't want to stay like that for the rest of the day, she said as she supported me while leaping forward into the trees. Ugh. I mentally groaned as the scenery shifted and my senses distorted even further. The worst part of this was the fact that my perception skill increased my senses, so right now I was probably having a much more intense experience than Kakashi was. Oh no! Rin yelled as my body abruptly shifted, causing me to groan, and I heard the ding sounds of metal colliding. Obito! What are you doing? I heard her yell. I'm sorry Rin, but I will not end up like Kakashi for an entire day. Obito yelled from behind before my danger sense lightly warned me. Unfortunately, my body was too weak to react, and I could only brace myself as an explosion rocked out beside me, the shockwave most likely throwing Rin off balance as I felt her loosen her hold on me. My body fell down to the earth below and impacted the ground with a resounding thud. -1 HP. Ow. Damn it Obito. I'm sorry Rin. The boy yelled, yet his voice started to become distant as he continued, I'll make it up to you, somehow. What about me? I thought before I heard Rin slam her fist into a tree causing it to crack. Obito. Why you? She suddenly gasped and I heard her footsteps scuttling towards my direction. Yoro! She yelled as she lifted me up. Come on. I will not let us lose to Obito. I really couldn't argue with her seeing as my body felt like soup, so I gave a HN in response as she started hopping from tree to tree. I closed my eyes trying to think of a way out of this predicament, as the wind washed over my face and sweat dripped from my brow. I shakily raised my free hand into a hand seal in order to create a clone, yet immediately my headache started pounding fiercer, and the chakra I had been molding slipped out of my grasp. I can't mold my chakra. I wasn't surprised that Minato took this into consideration, but this just made my situation all the more difficult. More so by the fact that I would not be able to even access storage seals if I couldn't release my chakra. Luckily, I didn't have to. Rin. I said softly, catching her attention as she looked at me. I lifted my hand and showed her a senbon I had taken from my inventory. How good is your accuracy? Yoro, what is dash? A poison-laced senbon that'll knock Obito out for a few minutes. We're shinobi, so we're going to have to play dirty in order to win. Her expression immediately turned determined as she griped her teeth. I will not be forced to experience vertigo for an entire day, she said as she grabbed the needle. I found it pertinent to give her a warning, however, don't let it seep into your skin, or you'll suffer intense drowsiness and you might knock yourself out. She hastily dropped the needle with wide eyes. You should have warned me about that before I grabbed the needle. I have a splitting headache, I feel like I'm going to throw up, I can't tell up from down, and there's a constant ringing in my ears. I apologize if my thoughts aren't clearly structured at this moment. She sighed before ripping off a piece of cloth from the apron skirt she wore before grabbing the needle. I'm sorry, Yoro, I just don't want to end up like you. That fills me with so much joy. I replied dryly before continuing, regardless, we have to get a move on if you don't want to end up like me. As long as you can catch up with Obito and hit him with the Senbon, then we might have a shot at winning this. She looked at me with determination in her eyes before hoisting me up and blitzing through the tree lines after Obito. She's moving really fast, I thought as the wind whipped in my face. Up ahead, through my distorted vision, I could see a small moving dot that was slowly growing larger in my vision. Obito, get back here! Rin yelled as she furiously picked up her pace. The black dot in the distance, now identified as Obito, froze for a fraction of a second before moving with even more vigor than before. Never! He yelled. Rin cutely knitted her brows and huffed before matching his pace as best as she could. This game of cat and mouse continued, Obito and Rin circling around the village with Kakashi and me on their shoulders respectively. There was the occasion kunai exchange and explosion as Obito tried to slow us down while Rin did her best to return the favor. Over time, however, I noticed that Rin, who had been slowly gaining on Obito, was starting to lose her speed as her face became increasingly flushed and her breathing increased. She's exhausted, but there's still 2 more laps to go. I thought and tried to fight through my pounding headache in order to think of a plan. I looked at Rin's flushed face and damp body before looking ahead and noting that Obito was only around 15 meters away. This might just work. Rin, try to get Obito to pay really close attention to you. Also, how good are you with seduction? Who, ha? She said, understandably startled. So, I reiterated. Distract Obito with your body and tranquilize him with the Senbon. Why are you? She yelled scandalized, her face turning a deeper shade of crimson. At this moment, my face turned green and I felt bile rise up my throat. I had to force it down before looking at her with my sickly face. If you don't want to end up like me for a day, you're going to have to use every advantage you have, i.e. your body, even though it's a bit underdeveloped for my tastes. No sooner did I feel an ungodly premonition wash over my very being as Rin looked at me with a sweet sunny smile. What did you say, Yoro? Dear Lord! I thought as I shuddered for a moment before immediately shaking myself from that feeling and glancing at Rin lazily. Do you want to end up like me? The brown-haired girl grit her teeth and clenched her fists. Fine. She stated, just as we reached the checkpoint marking this as our last lap. She focused her gaze ahead and took a deep breath. Oh, Obito-kun, won't you slow down for me? Please? She said cutely with her face burning crimson and her clothes, damp from sweat, sticking tightly to her body. She needs some work. I thought blandly, but I noticed Obito freeze up ahead, most likely from the, not really, seductive sound of her voice. I mean, she was 11, but I suppose that since they were the same age, it wasn't an issue. Won't you look at me? Rin continued with a wink, though since Obito's back was turned, the effect was kind of lost. Obito hopped down to the ground below as the forested area ended and slowly cranked his head around. Instantly, a trail of blood exited his nose as his eyes roamed all over her. Rin, why you? You like what you see? Rin asked sensually, or at least she tried to, as she took slow steps towards Obito, the boy in question taking a couple steps back while holding his nose with his free hand, Kakashi in the other. Yes. Then what are you running away? She continued with a sweet smile. Don't you want all of me? She asked cutely, her face turning even more crimson than it had been before. Steam almost seemed to come out of Obito's ears as he wobbled back another step. I feel so disturbed by this. I thought blandly before deciding that this was enough. You're enjoying this too much, just Senbon him already. I whispered unemotionally. This was your idea. She whispered back harshly before gritting her teeth and placing her hand behind her back, hiding her weapon from view. She looked at the still dazed Obito and took another step closer. Well, didn't hold back. Noting that Obito was unmoving, Rin looked at him worriedly. Obito? She said as she walked up to him. She poked his face with her finger, causing his body to wobble and drop back, blood running from his nose and a stupid smile visible on his face. He was unconscious. I can't believe that worked, and Kakashi is unconscious too. Rin stated in surprise as she noted the swirls in Kakashi's eyes. Kakashi was already unconscious before this. If not, he would have warned Obito about such an obvious and sad attempt at seduction. I suppose it's for the best that we chose this moment to act, or we would have failed. I stated indifferently before continuing with a sigh, well, let's finish this race already. It's been a long day. When she didn't respond, I raised my head to look at her. Rin. She turned to look at me, a sickly sweet smile on her face. What exactly did you say back then? She asked kindly. Oh dear. I thought before racking my brain to come up with a plan out of this predicament, that you were such an amazing, kind-hearted, and beautiful girl that anyone would fall for your charms. I was still handicapped at this moment, so it was in my best interest to not set her on edge. Rin widened her eyes and then coughed into her hand a few times, her face growing red. Is that so? Then I suppose we should get a move on. She quickly turned her gaze from me before running to finish the last lap. How to say, she's only 11 years old after all. So, you weren't actually planning on giving us vertigo for a day? I asked lazily as I gazed at the yellow-haired man. Said individual gave me a genuine smile as he explained, of course not, that was just to encourage you all to do your best and push yourself past your limits. I have to say though, I wasn't quite expecting that. Minato finished with an amused/awkward smile. It was all Yora's idea. Rin yelled with a flustered look on her face. We won, didn't we? It's all good. I replied blithely. She glared at me in anger and embarrassment before her face turned pink and she looked away. You cheater. Obito, who had been quietly blushing this entire time, stated softly. Using such a dirty method to win. It worked, didn't it? Plus, as shinobi we sometimes have to use the dirtiest methods to win. Besides look, Kakashi's taking it like a pro, aren't you? The spiky silver-haired boy looked at me listlessly before turning to look at Minato while intoning, if we're done here, I'll be going home. The man asked Kakashi with concern. Are you sure? Kushina should have been back by now from her grocery run, so she's most likely making dinner right now for some guests. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you and the others joined in. Kakashi shook his head while replying, thank you for your concern, sensei, but today's festivities has exhausted me. I would prefer to retire to my home. Minato gave him a light smile. Well, I can't force you to stay, but you know where to find me if you need anything. Thank you, sensei. Kakashi replied with a bow before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. I think I'm going to get home to my grandmother as well. Obito stated to Minato before glancing at Rin awkwardly, then snarling at me, Yoro, I'm going to get you back for that, you cheapskate. Don't lie to yourself. I started, glancing at him disinterestedly. We all saw that stupid happy smiling face you had. You definitely enjoyed it. Minato coughed into his fist awkwardly while Rin blushed. Meanwhile, Obito's face turned into a tomato. What? I did no dash, he stuttered before glaring at me and huffing away. Without saying another word, he hopped into the trees, making his way back home. I'll also be taking my leave. Rin stated as she bowed to Minato. She turned her gaze towards me, her face turning crimson, before giving me a curt nod and quickly turning away. Without another word, she too disappeared into the distance. Those kids. Minato stated with a sigh before smiling and shaking his head. He looked back at me and stated, I'm sure Kushina would like to introduce you to the guests, Yoro. You want to come? I thought for a second before nodding. I suppose if my presence isn't a bother. The man waved me off. Of course not, and besides, I'm sure they'll want to meet you as well. I raised a brow, just out of curiosity. Who exactly are the guests coming over? I asked. Old friends from back in the academy. Well, an old friend and her husband, but it would be awkward not to invite him. Minato finished, nostalgia visible on his face. I blinked. I see. I suppose we should get going then. Minato nodded and vanished in a body flicker, me following him soon after. We arrived in front of the Namikaze Uzumaki compound soon after, which Minato placed his hand on the seal pad on the side of the door and flared his chakra. The door opened, giving us an unfiltered view of the interior of the home, causing my and Minato's eyes to widen. K Kushina, W what? Minato stated, dumbfounded as he stared at the numerous Kushina clones running about, each doing separate chores. One was sweeping the floor, one was mopping the floor, one was trying to comfort a crying Mito, one was setting up the dinner table, and the last view we could see, as we had been walking around the house, was frantically managing multiple pots and pans of food on the stove. Minato, they're going to be here any minute now, and I'm not even done yet. A Kushina yelled as she came down the stairs, her face visibly frantic. At this, Minato gave her a calm, amused smile. Hun, you're overreacting. I'm here to help, aren't I? Don't worry, I got you, he said as he hugged her close. They stood like that for a moment, before Kushina stated with a muffled voice, why couldn't you be so dependable when it comes to Mito? Minato scratched his head awkwardly. She's kind of a handful, especially at night. I can't help it. Wait, are you still hung up on that? That was a week ago. Is that why you dash? SHH, not in front Yoru. He's just a child. Minato widened his eyes and looked at me as if remembering that I was still here. He gave a sigh before putting his lips to Kushina's ears and whispering, fine, but you owe me for this later. 5 days without it is just cruel. Kushina shuddered and whispered back, I'll make it up to you, thoroughly. La la la, I can't hear them. God, these enhanced senses are as much of a curse as they are a blessing. I thought, my eye twitching. And now I've got an image stuck in my head. Eidetic memory is also a curse. Minato smiled and clapped his hands before saying, now then, shadow clone jutsu. Immediately, multiple Minatos popped up around Minato and waited at attention. Well, we're at your service, the main Minato stated with a bow. Kushina licked her lips, well, if you don't mind helping me with this. And so she gave them all instructions to follow, after which all the Minato clones went about completing the assignments Kushina gave them. I watched with a raised brow as the surroundings visibly became neater and cleaner with each passing second, the Minatos becoming a blur as they worked. In no time at all, the house looked radically different, with everything in somehow more perfect order than they had been before. It wasn't like the house had been that messy to begin with, so it kind of made me wonder why Kushina had been stressing so much. I guess she wanted to make a good impression on her friend, I thought while watching Kushina beam brightly at the house improvements. The Minato clones all puffed at once, leaving just a single Minato left who had a light sweat forming down his brows. The table is already set. Yoru, you mind helping me place the food down? Kushina asked as her clones had just finished prepping the meals. I nodded my head, and with both Kushina and Minato helping along, we got everything set up rather quickly. It was at the moment when we had just put the finishing touches on the table setup that we heard a knock on the door. They're here, just in time too, Kushina stated with relief as she took off her apron. Minato, Yoru, come, let's go greet them. And without even waiting for my reply, she and Minato left to entertain their old friend, leaving me by the dinner table. I followed them soon after and stood there not knowing what to do as I saw them open the door, two forms immediately visible in front of me. The first one of note was a man with short, brown hair that reached to his shoulders and onyx-colored eyes, with visible creases below them. He wore a simple kimono with gray pants. Fugaku, I thought before looking at the next individual of note. She was a beautiful fair-skinned woman with long, straight black hair. She had long bangs hanging on either side of her face that roughly framed her cheeks, and her eyes were onyx-colored. She wore a simple brown blouse with a dark purple skirt and a light yellow apron worn over it. Furthermore, I noted that there was a large bulge protruding from her stomach, signaling that she was in the later terms of pregnancy. Mikoto, sigh, all the beautiful women are older. I shook my head from those weird thoughts before noting that there was actually a third member hidden behind the two adults. Mikoto. It's been too long, it's great to see you again. I heard Kushina say, joy evident on her face as she moved to lightly embrace her friend. Mikoto looked at her with a smile. It has been a while, hasn't it? I'm glad we finally decided to get together again. It's great to see you too, Minato, Kushina. She said with her sweet-sounding, joyful, divine voice. I need an intervention. Why am I so young? Minato then chuckled lightly, breaking me from my thoughts. Likewise, it is great to see you and Fugaku-san as well. He stated before pausing for a moment, noting the small silhouette behind them. And you brought the little guy as well. Minato stated with a smile. Mikoto replied happily, of course, I figured it would be good for him to get out more. Come on, why don't you introduce yourself? I'm Itachi Uchiha, pleased to make your acquaintance Lord Minato, Lady Kushina. The now identified Itachi stated with a bow. Weird, this feels like déjà vu. Kushina stated before her eyes widened and she looked behind at me. Oh yeah, Yoru, why don't you introduce yourself as well? I nodded my head and faced the Uchiha couple with a short bow. My name is Yoriden, orphan, but you may simply refer to me as Yoru. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Fugaku, Lady Mikoto, and Itachi. I intoned softly. I had to be respectful to the clan heads, etiquette, and all that. As I stood up, however, I noted the strange gazes that everyone, but Itachi, was giving me, and the young Uchiha as they alternated their sights between us. Minato was the one to break the silence as he asked. Well, since that seems to be the end of the pleasantries, why don't we make our way to the dinner table? That would be much welcome, and I thank you for the invitation. Came Fugaku's reply. No thanks necessary, after all, we are in the company of friends. Kushina stated with a smile as she directed them to the living room. Shall we? With that, everyone took their seiza positions on the zabuton, cushions for sitting, around the 20 centimeters tall shibudai, which was the short-legged table used in traditional Japanese homes. The Uchiha family sat on one end while Kushina, Minato, and I sat on the other. We all clapped our hands, and with a quick itadakimasu we began our feast. I picked out a few close-by dishes for myself after the guests had already chosen their meals. With that, I simply paid attention to the idle chatter between the adults. I saw Kushina smile as she looked at Mikoto's bulged stomach and couldn't help but tease, I always found it interesting how a few months after my daughter's birth, I finally saw the visible signs of your pregnancy. I wonder if she encouraged you too. I had the distinct pleasure of watching Mikoto's expression turn pink, and even Fugaku had a light dusting of the cheek as he replied somewhat teasingly, You have no idea how many times she talked about having another after seeing your daughter. Fugaku. Mikoto yelled, her face growing more crimson by the minute. The adults burst into laughter at their antics while I simply enjoyed the food. How are you doing that? A voice quietly asked me from across the table, prompting me to look up from my meal. I noted that since the adults were in their own world, they didn't really pay attention to anything else, and it helped that Itachi was sitting right across from me. I looked at him plainly. You're going to have to be more specific. He pointed at my face before elaborating, How are you eating with the mask on? I blinked as I recalled that I still had that Kakashi-esque mask on my face. Sometimes it felt like it wasn't even there to begin with, and in a way it wasn't, well, at least not at this moment. I looked at the Uchiha with a light smile. Trust me, it's really a basic trick. When an acquaintance of mine told me how he did it, I almost felt like hitting my head against the wall for not figuring it out earlier. That seemed to pique his interest as he blinked a couple times and looked at me closely, tilting his head a few times in order to better observe my face mask. I looked at him in amusement. You think you figured it out yet? Not quite, he said honestly as returned to his normal position. I chuckled softly and leaned in close, prompting the Uchiha to do so as well with his ear turned towards me. Genjutsu, I whispered quietly. His eyes widened for a moment before he schooled his expression. I see. Even though his expression was flat, I could feel the emotions emanating from him at my answer. I had felt the same way as well when Kakashi had first told me of his trick. It pretty much involved him putting a very small genjutsu on his mask to make it appear like it was completely on his face when in actuality it was ever so slightly lowered right below his lips. It was such a minuscule difference in positioning that I doubted that most seasoned shinobi would have the chance of figuring it out at first glance. Well, look at you two getting along together. Honestly, why am I not surprised? It's almost like you two are the same people, Kushina stated as she looked at us with a smile. Look. Even your expressions are the same. The rest of the adults chuckled a little bit at our expense before Makoto stated, next time why don't you all come over to our place for dinner? I would love to return the favor for all of this. No, you don't have to, Minato started, but was cut off as Fugaku interrupted. We insist. As a clan head and a shinobi, we always have to pay our debts regardless of how small or insignificant. Please allow us to show you our hospitality at a later date, Fugaku stated seriously. Minato smiles for a moment before putting on a helpless smile. I suppose we don't have a choice, so we? No, you don't. Fugaku replied with a slight smile. I blinked a couple times and just decided to focus on my food for the duration of the dinner. The grown-ups all talked about their lives and other small talk, all the while Itachi and I observed silently. After around an hour or so of bonding, the Uchiha couple decided it was time for them to depart. After saying their goodbyes and promising that they would do this again, they left the premises. Well, that was exciting, Kushina stated with a smile before clapping her hands together. Well, let's clean up, shall we? Minato smiled a little bit before blinking. Let me check up on the baby first, make sure she's still sleeping and all that, he said before walking up the stairs. So with him gone, I helped Kushina clear the table. Thank you for being here, Yoru, Kushina suddenly stated. You know, it even seemed like you and Itachi were bonding quite nicely there. You should meet up with him more. I barely talked to him, I stated blandly. And yet you seem to bond even more because of it. Sure, I said. The red-headed woman chuckled and ruffled my hair before saying, anyway, you can head back home for tonight and get some rest. I'm sure it has been a long day. I slightly inclined my head. Thank you and Minato for your hospitality. Oh, shush you. Shoo, Kushina said jokingly as she waved me off, causing me to smile lightly. As I moved to leave, however, I was suddenly struck with the memories of one of my library clones, causing me to pause. Yoru? Kushina asked in slight worry, yet my mind was elsewhere. Due to the fact that new material was constantly coming into and out of the library, I had created the habit of sending a clone over there every day to check out any new additions. Usually, it amounted to nothing since the new literature wasn't valuable to me. However, today was different. Kushina, how much do you know about natural energy? The woman paused and looked at me for a moment with a thoughtful expression. Not much, she admitted before continuing. I know the basics, but if you are looking for more advanced information on the subject, then I know only two individuals who would be able to give you some information on the subject, Jiraiya and Minato. Wait, Minato knows how to use natural energy? I thought to myself in wonder. My mind rapidly went through the information my clone had memorized from the book, and immediately many new plans and ideas formed. Why the sudden curiosity? Kushina asked, breaking me from my thoughts. I took a light breath. My clone had just finished reading a book on the subject recently, written by Lord Jiraiya himself. I explained before continuing, if you don't mind, I would like to wait for a little until Minato comes back down. She shrugged, do what you need to. I nodded my head in thanks and finished clearing the table, after which I waited for the yellow-haired jonin to come down. I was soon rewarded by the sounds of footsteps coming down the stairs. She's out like a light, hopefully she stays that way the rest of the nig dash. You cheated, I said blandly, cutting the blonde man off from his statement. Minato blinked. What? So, I explained, the reason I couldn't sense you earlier was due to the fact that you were blending in with your surroundings through the use of natural energy. As you said before, you were essentially everywhere as you were one with the environment. The man looked at me in amusement, then chuckled lightly. And how exactly did you figure that? I thought for sure that I'd be able to stump you for a while. For the past few months, I've made it a habit of reading newly published material on chakra theory in the library. I started before explaining further. Just recently, Lord Jiraiya wrote a book detailing his research on natural energy and how it can interact with individuals. Teacher did? Minato stated before looking at me skeptically. Then how did you even get access to that? And it was a legitimate question to ask. The Konoha Public Library had many levels to it that weren't actually public and required high-level clearance to get access to. Those levels usually contained high-level techniques or advanced-level theories that would not be allowed to be made public for anyone. Usually, I wouldn't have had the access necessary to reach Jiraiya's book on natural energy as it required a decently high-security clearance, but luckily, I had my ways. Koto, I said, causing Minato's lips to twitch. He shook his head and regarded me, his hands slipped into his pockets. So? I doubt you waited for me here just to tell me that you found out my trick. Of course not, I said, shaking my head. I was actually hoping to ask for your help with your knowledge of natural energy and seals. I've been meaning to create a new technique by using natural energy, but all the information I found at the library in the past was rudimentary at best. This seemed to pique his interest as he asked, "Oh? What kind of technique?" "Secret," I replied, but added, "However, if I can successfully create it, then I don't doubt it will change the landscape of the war in our favor." That really piqued his interest as he looked at me seriously. "If you're so confident about this, then I suppose it's for the best that you keep it to yourself." He paused for a moment and closed his eyes in thought before opening them. "For a while now I've been working on reverse engineering a technique, but I suppose I can lend a hand to help you out with your project." "Thank you," I stated with a short bow. The man, however, shook his head. "There's no need, it's not much effort on my part anyway." "Is there anything else you need, Yoro?" I thought for a second before denying. "No, that will be all for now, so I'll be taking my leave." I turned to leave, but paused and turned back to Minato before saying, "I hope you and Kushina enjoy each other's company tonight." Immediately after, I could see his eyes widen in surprise as he slightly gawked. "Wadash." Later, I said, and left the house in a quick body flicker. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.